saw Chris. And Chris, Nick, and who's here from Burgess tonight? Chris, do you know, or?
Chris is here.
It'll be Tom Behrens.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris Dower. Okay.
Who was that? Who was that, Chris? I'm sorry.
It's Tom Behrens. I think he's coming in now.
Okay.
And for a second, I thought Mr. Warner was going to be a planner and an attorney.
No. I'll save the punchlines for later, although I may need him as a preemptive strike. I see Board Member Pirelli getting ready.
Yeah, stay on your toes there, Steve.
Oh, you'll keep me there. You'll keep me.
All right, so I see Ellen has come in. Not visually yet, but I see the name up there.
Yeah, that's everyone. Bill.
And Tom is there too. Okay. Hi, Tom. Hi, Ellen. All right. I guess we're pretty much ready to start, huh? Okay. So we'll call the meeting to order of Summit Planning Board. Notice statement. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by the board in preparation of the 2021 annual meeting notice, which sets forth the date, time, and place of this meeting, and by properly posting such notice and forwarding the notice to those designated newspapers and persons requesting meeting notices. Moreover, in order to comply with the national and state declarations of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the municipal land use law, the Open Public Meetings Act, and the recent operational documents from the Department of Community Affairs, this meeting is being held virtually as a web-based platform with remote public access. All right, so we'll go to our Pledge of Allegiance, and my flag is over my shoulder there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
nation,
under
God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, can we have a roll call?
Absolutely. Chairman Henderson.
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff.
Here.
Councilmember Little.
Here.
Paulson Alvarez.
Here.
Ms. McNeil.
Here.
Glory.
Here.
Zucker.
Present.
Mr. Perrella.
Here.
Mr. Fiore.
Here.
Mr. Formicelli.
Here.
Mayor Ashman.
Present.
For the record, Mr. Warner is here. You have a quorum. You can proceed.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. All right, so coming up, we have the meeting minutes for from January 25th. And once again, Chris did an excellent job. Anybody have any comments or questions, additions, deletions to the meeting minutes? All right, hearing none. Chris, let's, I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All right, and I guess we'll take a vote there.
Voice vote's fine, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary?
Yep, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Great, thanks.
None.
No one opposed, huh? All right, excellent.
And no abstentions because it was a full house.
Yeah, excellent, yes.
Steve, do you want Mr. Giannetti up for the being carried, or are we just powering through?
I mean, we're making that announcement, and I assume we're up to that point. So unless he has something to add to that, I guess you can bring him in, sure, in the off chance he has something to add. But I guess, Mr. Chairman, you'll be once we have Mr. Giannetti, you'll be formally announcing that we'll be carrying
Correct,
that
yes.
matter and the other.
Yep, absolutely. I didn't know Mr. Giannetti was going to join us tonight, but that's good. He's out there.
Well, since it's as easy as just turning my computer on, it's a lot easier than joining than driving to the municipal building. So I'm only here to answer any questions or comments, but we did submit a letter to the board requesting an adjournment of our application to the March 22nd meeting.
So
Right. And if I may confirm, Mr. Chairman, yes, we did get that letter. The applicant requested the adjournment to 7:30 p.m. To the March 22nd meeting, as I understand it. And they did give us an extension of time to act in writing through the month of March. So we're
Good.
covered there.
Good. Okay, great. All right. Well, Mr. Giannetti, assuming everything is all in order as far as you're concerned,
Yes.
you can go have your dessert now.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, board members. Have a good evening.
All right, you too.
Next.
All right, next item on the agenda is the Beechwood at Summit LLC, which we also want to carry to March 22nd as well. Any comment there, Mr. Warner? Or
Just to confirm, as with the Primrose adjournment, that's without further notice, 7:30 p.m., March 22nd, 2021, via Zoom. And as with the other one, they did also, the applicant's counsel for Beechwood at Summit provided a written extension of time for the board to act through the end of March. So again, we're covered there.
all right, excellent. Okay, good. So then it brings us to the third item on the agenda, the Bristol Myers Squibb major site plan to construct and modify and add to building S3. I guess we have Mr. Weber there, or who's representing that them tonight?
Yeah, let me promote
Mr.
Mr.
Alfonso or Mr. Weber?
Yeah, Chris, if with the chair's permission, you could promote the entire group. And if I could just add, Mr. Chairman, for the record, that we did carry this matter, which was properly noticed, as I stated last time. We carried it without further notice to this evening, 7:30 p.m. So the board continues to have jurisdiction to hear the case and continues to have sufficient jurisdiction to decide the case if we complete the case this evening. And I believe everyone was here, all our board members. Chris, can you confirm we're here last time and for this hearing?
Yeah, I just took a look. Everybody was here.
Okay, thank you. So our full complement, regular members can vote, and our alternates can nonetheless participate otherwise.
Absolutely. Okay, excellent. So we're going to let in Mr. Weber, Ms. Alfonso, and the team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, James Weber of Dempsey, Dempsey & Sheehan, on behalf of the applicant, Bristol Myers Squibb. I am asking to call as the first witness, not Sony David, but instead Jack Zamora, our acoustical consultant. And we'll get right to the heart of this matter, and that is sound.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for the record, my notes indicated that we completed the questioning last time of the first witness, Janos Angeli. And it's certainly the prerogative of the applicant to proceed with the next witness as they see fit. Probably a good choice to address that issue head on. I'll swear him in since he wasn't sworn in last time. I don't think he was with us last time.
Nope.
So Mr. Zabora, now that I could see you, if you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Weber to question his witness.
Yep. Mr. Weber,
Thank you.
take it away. Thanks.
Mr. Zabora, could you state your qualifications as an acoustical consultant for the board?
Sure. I'm a project manager at Lewis Goodfriend, and Associates. I have a bachelor's of engineering in acoustical engineering from the University of Hartford. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I'm also board certified by the Institute of Noise Control Engineers, and I've provided testimony before this board back in 2016.
When you testified in front of the board, that was for the Elks application on Maple Street in Summit?
That is correct.
And you have consulted with Highland Associates, the architects who are in charge of the planning of the structure and the systems consistent with this application. And are you
Yes.
familiar with the application that's pending before the board and with regard to the mechanical systems and the cooling towers that are proposed?
Yes, I am.
I would ask that he be accepted as an acoustical expert, Mr. Chairman.
Any members of the board would like to question this expert? All right. From far as we're concerned, he can be viewed as an expert witness in sound.
Thank you. Mr. Zabora, have you been provided with the specifications for the proposed whisper quiet cooling tower that is proposed on the top of S3?
Yes, that's a particular type of fan type that Baltimore Aircoil can add to their cooling towers. I'm familiar with it.
And in connection with that review of the specifications in that cooling tower, have you been able to extrapolate from that whether or not the proposed cooling towers will be, once installed, consistent with the noise ordinance of the city of Summit? It's not a DRO, it's a revised general ordinance, but the noise ordinance of the city of Summit.
Yes, so what we do is we take the manufacturer's sound data for that unit and we construct a 3D model of the site based on the drawings, the site plan, the elevation drawings, and we input the data from the manufacturer and use our 3D modeling program to calculate the expected sound levels at various distances and receivers from that equipment. And we did prepare a report dated today.
And I would ask that the report, which is dated 22 February 2021, which shows on it the areas that have been proposed as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as the acoustical evaluation locations be admitted to the board. I think we're on A5.
I have a,
Bear with me, let me double check that. But before we do, Mr. Chairman, my advice is, given the date of the report, less than 10 days in advance of this evening, it not only need be marked as an exhibit, but certainly should be displayed. The content should be shared on the screen for the board members, board professionals, and members of the public to examine same.
Sure, and I can do that.
Okay,
Or I
good.
get Samantha did it. Yep.
I'm just trying to find my, oh, here we are. I think Chris, if you haven't found it yet, I see A4 and I don't yet see anything after that. So I think we're up to A5.
I have A5 as LP 101, but
That's what I have as well.
so then
I'm
that
sorry.
would be A6 is what we're on.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I didn't have A5. Okay, A6, good enough. Thank you.
Okay, so that's our report dated today's date, 22 February 2021, and it's entitled Outdoor Sound Level Evaluation. And I'll try to describe it as we're scrolling along. So our first section just outlines the site layout, the address of the site, and the equipment that was included in the model. So you can see, first and foremost, are those 2 Baltimore Aircoil units. We also modeled a couple of indoor air handling units, which are inside a penthouse. We modeled 3 Mitsubishi condensing units and also 4 Greenheck exhaust fans. But the primary noise producer on that roof are the cooling towers, as you might imagine. And as far as noise regulations go, NJDEP maintains a statewide ordinance, as does the city of Summit also has regulations on their books, and they are the same level. So it's a daytime limit of 65 dBA, a nighttime limit of 50 dBA. And then there's also individual octave band limits, which are different limits at different frequencies of sound. And that's what you see there in table 1. And then the nighttime limits only apply for residential receivers, and those are the focus of our evaluation of these units. As I mentioned, we created Acoustical Model using sound plan software. It's a 3D modeling program. It considers the distance between the sources and receivers, the attenuation due to building shielding and reflections off of buildings, ground absorption, air absorption, and we're able to calculate the expected levels at the receiving properties. And then in section 4 here, you'll see a table 2, which has the results of that evaluation at locations 1 through 5, and we'll show you a figure on the next page that shows you where those receivers are. So 1 is to the north across River Road, 2, 3, and 4 are all across Morris Ave, and then 5 is to the south across Lincoln Ave. And our evaluation considers that all of this equipment is operating on what we'd say design day conditions. So all the cooling towers are running full load, all fans running. That's not something that would typically happen every night, but it could feasibly happen. If you have a hot summer night, they might have to run full load at 5 a.m. or so to help cool the building down for occupancy later that day.
So would you walk Mr. Zabora through evaluation location and indicate what the expected sound level will be at
Yeah,
the,
so up at,
Oh, wait. One speaker. Go ahead, please finish the question.
at the DBA?
yeah, so location 1 to the north across River Road, we calculated 49. At location 2, we're calculating 50. At 3, we're calculating 49. At 4, we're calculating 46. And at 5, we're calculating 42. And I'll also mention that those numbers are at the highest story window, if applicable. So when you're actually on the ground, it'll be a little quieter, but we need to be conservative, consider the worst case receiver, which could be a second or third story window.
Now, Mr. Zabor, you indicated this is what is expected when the equipment is installed and running at full load. How do you know what will be the sound levels once the equipment is installed?
Sure. So what we can propose to do is to complete a post-installation sound level survey. And in a sense, we go out to each of these locations. We would take a measurement with all the equipment operating. We would take a second reading with the equipment off. And then you could essentially subtract the two readings with logarithmic subtraction to find out what the contribution of that equipment is at the property line for comparison to the codes.
You can do that even though, for example, number 2 is on Morris Avenue. This would still provide you assurance that the representations that are being made are in fact consistent with what was actually built?
Correct, because we use the off measurements to essentially subtract out the contribution of traffic noise and any other noise that might be in the area unrelated to the site.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Warner, on behalf of DMS, I'm authorized to represent that if the board were to approve the application, they'd be willing to engage in this post-construction evaluation through the offices of Lewis, Goodfriend and Associates to confirm that the representations that are being made tonight, consistent with the proposed cooling towers and mechanical equipment, actually result in the field with those representations.
Mr. Warner, I think you had something you might want to.
Well, yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Because I appreciate that. I have a tendency to grab stipulated conditions when I can on behalf of the board, but I did have something perhaps a little more detailed in mind. I want to run through it with Mr. Weber and the board. Of course, any condition is subject to the subject to the application being approved and the desire of the board to impose the condition or accept the stipulation. But the condition, and I'll try to read it fast. I wrote it, it's a little long. But Mr. Weber, it reads, if the board approves the application within 60 days of said decision by the board, the applicant shall conduct a post-approval sound level testing along all property lines and shall demonstrate that sound levels comply with the requisite sound level requirements set forth in section 3.8 of our revised general ordinances and New Jersey Administrative Code 729 et sec, that's the state requirement, at all times. All testing shall be done at the applicant's expense by a qualified investigator and in accordance with the requirements of the ordinance and the state law. Said sound level testing shall be done by a qualified investigator subject to and reviewed by an authorized agency as defined in 729-1.1, which provides that an authorized agency means a department. That's the Department of, that's the state at the state level, or a local, county, or regional health agency certified pursuant to the County Environmental Health Act to perform noise enforcement activities, or a municipality with a department approved noise control ordinance, our municipality, or an employee of a county or municipal government who has received noise enforcement training and who is currently certified in noise enforcement pursuant to the state statute, provided such agency, municipality, or employee is acting within its designated jurisdiction. That's all provided for by the state. Those are all the different ways in which we can confirm what is being told to us by the qualified investigator on behalf of the applicant. It goes on. If the results of the sound level testing demonstrate that the applicant is not in strict compliance with the aforementioned state and local requirements, the applicant shall have 30 days from the date of completion of the testing to submit a mitigation plan, subject to review and approval by the designated authorized enforcement agency or its designee, and to install such mitigation measures. Upon the expiration of 30 days or the completion of the installation of the mitigation measures, whichever is sooner, the applicant shall have 60 days to again conduct post-mitigation sound level testing as described above, and to demonstrate that sound levels have been sufficiently mitigated and strictly comply with all state and local regulations. A long way of saying you got to post-approval, test it, show us compliance, and if you're not complying, you got to submit a mitigation plan and then retest and show us you're complying. So it's an ongoing obligation to get to confirmation of compliance with the state and city ordinances and regulations, which match each other.
If I can, Mr. Warner, we have received from George Cornelius, the Westfield Environmental Health Regional Representative, who also covers Summit, and he has forwarded his reports of sound testing that he's done, independent of what BMS has done, and that has gone to Mr. Nicola. I would ask that that be considered for consideration only with regard to the type of condition that the board would consider in the approval of the application. So if I could have that distributed or marked as A7 for the purposes of determining the condition of approval, and distributed or brought to the screen, Mr. Nicola, so that the board members have an opportunity to see it.
And while you're doing that, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Weber, it's my understanding that that was done perhaps a year or so ago, maybe, let's see, November and December of 20. Oh, I take that back.
2 years, 2019.
2020 was last year, but it wasn't quite a year ago.
2020, it was.
Yeah. Okay, I thought it was 2019, but it was still a few months or so ago. It would not be if this is approved, it would not be post-approval and for this particular application, nor of course would it be post-installation of the equipment that's proposed by this application. So I understand you're asking the board just to consider what these reports may say.
So, Mr. Warner, just when I'm looking at the top of the report, it says date of measurement 11/19. Then we come down a little bit. This looks like September 21st, 2020. Maybe someone can explain why we have differences, of 10 months between the date of measurement and these other last certified dates.
If we can scroll further down, Mr. Chairman, I believe that when we look at the results, you'll see that the explanation. So we see time on site 8:20, completion time 10:27, total time on site of a particular number of hours. Then when we go further down, we see then we have at that point the measurement of neighborhood residual sound 11/19/20. And when we go down, we see that all of those readings on the left-hand side, as we go through them, we see they're all in the 40s. If we go further down to the noise measurement report again, we see that he dated it 12/7/2020. And we go further down, readings on a separate sheet. And then we go all the way to the last page, 5. Thank you. And again, we look at those readings. We see 38, 39. We see 40s. We see a car. And we go down to 40.3. And then we go to the conclusion. We see the octave bands. We see 59 below limit. We keep going to 53 below limit. And that concludes the reports that George Cornelius prepared on behalf of the Westfield Regional Environmental Health System. And when we look
if I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Weber, my understanding though is that those were November 19 and December 17, 2020 reports, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and it's also my understanding that you're not calling Mr. Cornelius as a witness, correct?
No, he is a consultant that provides reports to the board. He had provided a prior report to the board, and this was a follow-up report that he had prepared and submitted for the board's consideration. And the only reason it's brought here is to indicate that there's nothing that the Westfield Regional Environmental and Health system that also represents Summit has found that BMS is in violation of any of the noise ordinances. The one summons that we do have is from November 20th, 2020. So as a result, there's nothing other than subjective complaints with regard to the sound that exists. I understand what Mr. Warner is proposing, but that's an overall campus-wide sound testing. And that's something that is currently within the municipal court of the city of Summit. So it makes it difficult to be able to engage in that kind of analysis while there's pending litigation that is proceeding with the city. As a result,
If I could on that note, Mr. Weber, can't
Yeah.
that testing be done? You could reserve all your rights and still do the testing if there's an approval here, and if the board imposes such a condition, you could still do such post-approval testing and mitigation efforts without any admissions or without any, with a reservation of all rights with respect to that litigation, such that you're not precluded from engaging in that post-approval, if there is an approval, compliance, correct?
well, what the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Warner, and Chairman of the board and board members, is that what is proposed by BMS is focused entirely on the S3 application. It is saying, yes, we can go ahead and do a post-compliance. If we're talking about doing a pre-compliance with regard to those 5 spots in connection with the cooling tower, I'm not sure what benefit that gives us. We're looking to put in the new cooling towers. Representations have been made that they will comply, and the agreement is let's do a check afterwards. Mr. Zabora has indicated that yes, you can do that analysis. You can do the confirm it when it's on, confirm it when it's off, and run it at full load. And at that point, we know that that application that's before the board will be consistent with the ordinance. The remainder of the entire campus, for that to be part of the S3 application, is really expanding the review without anything that would suggest that there was a violation, especially since we have the Westfield review, which did not issue any summonses, and they didn't issue any summonses because there was no violation. One that we have, City of Summit has chosen to enforce it, and as a result, I would respectfully request that the condition of approval, if the board approves the application, be limited to the S3 cooling.
We hear you there, Mr. Weber, and with your request. Anything with regard to this witness? Any further?
Well, Mr. Zabora has heard the exchange, and he has heard me make the representations. I'd like to hear from him as to whether he considers what I've said appropriate, or whether or not there's something that he can embellish upon to put the board's mind at ease that BMS is going to install cooling towers consistent with what is proposed. Now, it may be that it's not this particular make and model, but it'll be consistent with the specifications, and it'll be of similar quality. And that he be able to see whether or not there's something that I've overlooked that the board may want to consider in the scope of the condition, because both Mr. Warner's condition and the condition that I'm authorized to make are really the same thing, saying, let's take a look afterwards. Let's make sure this is consistent. I'm just asking on behalf of BMS, and I'm authorized to do that, to limit it to the S3 application. Doesn't mean that there isn't ongoing discussions, as the public record shows from the council meetings. The mayor has indicated that there have been studies conducted. BMS is in the process of creating baffles for S7. They're in the process of installing a new motor on S7. So it's not as though this is something that is not being addressed. It's just that for this application, I would ask that it be limited to that which is before the board. So, Mr. Zabora?
Before you do, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to get confirmation on what is being agreed to by Mr. Weber, is it the condition I laid out, but for the fact that I laid out one that is campus-wide in scope as opposed to one that is S3 infill addition targeted? Is that the only difference? And otherwise you would stipulate to the condition?
I think so.
Okay.
And the reason I'm pausing is I want to make sure that when I say this to Mr. Zabora, that we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You want it you want it or post approval and then post construction.
Correct. Well, I don't, it's up to the board, but what I'm proposing for the board's consideration, to the extent you'll stipulate to it and to the extent you won't, the board may wish to impose it, is that it be both post-approval, pre-installation, as well as post-approval and post-installation, so that it be confirmed at both times that the noise levels, the 50 dBA nighttime are not being exceeded. And mitigation each time should it be necessary in order to get those decibel readings below the 50 dBA.
Mrs. Zabora, I think you're on now.
Yeah, so that was the first thing I wrote down, was that you mentioned post-approval instead of post-installation. I don't know what post-approval really gains us. We're not going to compare the ambient of post-approval to the source on of post-installation, because the ambient conditions could change day to day, let alone months to months. Traffic patterns will change. Who knows what lifted or suppressed COVID restrictions might change. So in terms of getting an ambient reading, I think the better way to do that is at the same time as post-construction. We take a measurement with the units running and a measurement with the units off. And that's typically what we see done in these situations.
I understand that, but if I may, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is there's currently a concern by many residents and others as to the current levels. So that's why a campus-wide condition has been proposed for consideration by the board. And that's why the board may wish to consider that condition, not only post-installation of the S3 infill addition with its associated equipment, but also may wish to consider that condition, that testing and compliance post-approval pre-installation to ensure that what appears to be the current noise problem is not necessarily a problem, in that it's at least compliant with the state and city maximum levels standards. So that's why this may be a little different, Mr. Zabora, than the usual circumstance. But I'm sorry, I interrupted your testimony. Why don't you continue?
Well, let me, I think we are at the point I need to speak with Mr. Zabora with BMS and see whether or not we can't agree to doing a post-approval, pre-construction testing. I understand Mr. Zabora's point that it may not be as definitive as post-approval, but let me take a look and see whether or not that isn't something that can be done to assure that the board's concerns are addressed. May we have a recess?
So, but just to be certain, Mr. Weber, you're talking about the S3 building specifically, as opposed to the park-wide reporting and testing? I just want to be sure what you're going to consult with your client about.
With regard to the S3, the five, what did he call those?
To keep it simple, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Weber, there's two issues you need to confirm with your client. One, will they agree to both pre-installation and post-installation testing and mitigation? And number two, will they agree to campus-wide as opposed to only S3 related equipment testing. Those are the two issues I think you need to confirm with your client. And again, my advice to the board is they're free to consider the imposition of whatever it is that the applicant is unwilling to stipulate to, if there is anything the applicant is unwilling to stipulate to. Does
Just, Mr.
everybody
Warner,
understand?
would it be beneficial to ask any of the board members if they have any questions or comments before this adjournment to see if they have an opinion one way or another? Or should-
Certainly makes sense to me, Mr. Chairman, your call.
Yeah, let's just ask, we're a little bit out of sync here. Usually we have questions of the witness, but given Mr. Weber's asked for this adjournment, I just wondered if any of the board members have any thoughts about the testing on a campus-wide basis or testing on a building-wide basis. So any one of the board members, Chris, you can see them all. Maybe ask any of the board members to wave their hands or speak up as they might want.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. I do have some concerns, and I would strongly advocate for campus-wide testing and pre-installation, and that's for several reasons. One is that we know that there are ambient noise issues that are going on that are being addressed as part of the plan that was previously approved by the planning board, and it seems to me that it's unwise for us to look at this S3 request in a vacuum and not consider the ongoing, consider the noise as a whole coming from the campus and do what we can to mitigate this. Part of our role as a planning board is to try to get to a point where the application is acceptable to all the parties, that we come out with a win-win for everyone, both the applicant and the residents and neighbors. And I think that looking at the S3 application, just in itself without considering all the other factors that are going on in the campus doesn't make sense. Both the previous application that was approved by the planning board to demolish the buildings and to do some other work and this S3 infill application are both part of the GDP that was approved. They're both part of a larger plan. So again, it doesn't make sense to me to consider both of them in a vacuum. It seems like we need to consider those holistically. So for me, I think we need to consider what issues we can bring up. It seems to me that we need to consider the noise that's already there and the noise that's already being generated by the applicant in general, and see what kind of additional noise might be created by this new addition, and look at what mitigation can be done, whether that's landscaping, whether that's further mitigation on the building itself. It just seems to me that we can't consider these things in a vacuum. And I just had one other point of order that I hope that we can address, is that my recollection is that we hadn't finished the public question from the previous witness. At the time that we finished the last meeting, we had to end, the court reporter, some board members and the court reporter had to finish before we had finished taking all the questions from the public on the last witness. So I was wondering if we were going to allow the public the chance to finish their questions from the last witness as well. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Councilmember Little. I guess we had thought maybe we had concluded, we're a little fuzzy on that. We thought we had concluded, we had 8 members of the public ask questions. We thought we concluded at that point. It was a little confusing. We talked about that before we came on the call today, Mr. Nicole and myself, to see if we had a list of people that were on hold or waiting to make comments and ask questions of Mr. Llanos. And so we didn't have that list, so we're not quite sure who it was that was waiting on it. And
Mr. Chairman, may I make a suggestion in that regard? Mr. Angeli.
Yeah, that's why we decided to start with a new witness.
Yeah, he's here, Mr. Angeli. So, certainly, Mr. Weber, I take it that you'll make him available for questioning after this witness or at some point in time for the members of the public?
To the extent that he's not already been questioned by that particular member, and there's another member, then yes, it would be preferable if we knew whether or not that member was, the public was available at the last hearing. If he was and didn't ask any questions. And if I recall correctly, my recollection is that there were no more hands raised. And as a result, that was taken as the time to conclude the hearing without calling Sony David.
This is Samantha, and that's my recollection as well. That's what my notes provide as well.
Okay, all right. So back to the question, thanks, Councilmember Little. Back to the question of, does anyone other board member like to speak on the topic of whether we're looking at a campus-wide noise study or one, restricted to the improvements to S3? Any other members of the board want to comment on that before we take a break?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, not a comment. And when we say campus-wide, does that mean there would be other testing locations? Because the testing is done at the perimeter of the campus, of course. Is that what campus-wide testing means? It's just a question.
Good question.
Or we're talking about we have 5 locations now that have been identified for as it relates to S3. But if you say campus-wide testing, does that mean around the entire perimeter? And I'm not offering an opinion as to whether that's right or wrong. I'm just asking that for clarification.
It would be up to a sound engineer or a qualified investigator to make the determination as to where to do it appropriately, but certainly campus-wide could be broader than the 5 locations selected by Mr. Zabura in his analysis. But I am no sound expert.
Right.
I couldn't make that determination, but it could be broader.
Nor am I, but common sense suggests that if you ask someone to do a noise testing of, quote, the campus, you would do it around the perimeter of the entire campus. That you don't have to be a sound engineer to come to that conclusion. I don't think that's a logical
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Whether it's
I didn't know if I was not misunderstanding it, because to me that seemed obvious, but it was not by the dialogue between you and Mr. Weber. That was not obvious. So I guess I'd like to have that cleared up. Although it seems now, based on your response, it seems clear to me, but maybe I'm misunderstanding yet again.
I would expect it to be over the entire 90 acres, and that's one of the problems that BMS has with this. We're asking for a very extensive study of something that there is no record at this point of a violation. The S3 application is the one that's before the board.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the S16 application, that was a resolution of approval back in summer 2019, if I recall correctly, also addressed conditions with respect to noise and noise abatement. And again, how onerous it is or isn't for them to conduct a campus-wide, arguably it could be 4 or 5 points around the campus in its entirety, as opposed to literally every few feet linear around the perimeter of the entire campus. So, and that's all I was referring to when I said exactly how many locations and where those locations are, I don't know. But yes, my assumption is if the board gets a stipulation or imposes a condition with respect to campus-wide, it's going to be a broader perimeter than the perimeter chosen by Mr. Zabura with respect to his study.
Okay. Other members of the board like to weigh in on that? I'm sort of scanning through the board members. I see some with Mr. Perella is not muted, but I don't know whether he wants to speak or not. And
No, Jennifer does.
okay, Ms. Paulson Alvarez, thank you.
It seems reasonable to me to ask for a broader study. And if everything is compliance and they believe everything is in compliance anyway, it'll just show that. So there won't be an issue. So it does not seem unreasonable to me in any way.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the board? And Mr. Warren, I don't know if it's appropriate at this time. Oh, yes, Mr. Ashman.
I guess maybe to address, it seems like there's a broad, obviously, issue around noise. Hypothetically, if at the far end of campus, the noise levels are very, very close to the limit, and this, device would kind of push us over the limit, right? It would, albeit in isolation, it would never hit a limit, but in conjunction with everything else, it might push us over the limit. I could see that it's reasonable to say, look, just like we kind of pick selected points around the perimeter, and and frankly, it may very well bolster the case for you. If everything's fine, then there would be no issue. Of course, if even though on the margin it's not like very loud, but it's on top of all the other noise, it kind of pushes us over the limit, I suspect, then that's what people are trying to avoid here.
So I think what you're saying, Mr. Ashman, is that campus-wide might be intelligent and a good thing to do. And then when you also factor in the new building, that would give you any incremental contribution that the new building would have. Is that fair way to characterize what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Any board members at all? And then I guess I should ask also if any of our consultants, Mr. Dorr or Tom, if you're here, or others have any thoughts on this as well, so that when Mr. Weber goes and talks with his client, he has all the information.
I don't have any comments at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Mr. Behrens, are you there?
I'm here, Mr. Chairman. I have no comments at this time, but share similar concerns as I've heard from the board so far.
Okay. So if I can summarize, Steve, Mr. Warner, you can help me out if I don't do this well, but I'm summarizing, Mr. Weber, I think you should ask your client about both of those options for a broader sound study as well as the S3 sound study. I think that would be what the board would like you to come back with an answer to that. Mr. Warner, would you add anything to that?
I would just simply add, I understood it also to similarly be both post-approval and pre-installation of the S3, as well as post-approval and post-installation of the S3, which would be commensurate with a broader scope of condition.
Okay. You mentioned, Mr. Warner, was it 2019? I forget the modification of the last time we were together with regard to, was it building 16, S16? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what you were referring to previously with regard to additional requests for sound, either attenuation or otherwise. In other words, what I'm getting at is I recall that there was some conversation along one of the avenues as it related to potentially providing additional landscaping and providing for not only landscaping, but I guess also for visual, for lights at night, car lights at night. But I thought that was part of what you were talking about too. So get everything out on the table here, I think, in terms of thoughts about study and sound and attenuation, et cetera.
What I was referring to, Mr. Chairman, was the application that was approved August 26, 2019. In case number PB-19-248, memorialized on September 23, 2019, resolution of approval at paragraph 13 addressed concerns by the public with respect to compliance with noise standards and a stipulation by the applicant to investigate options and reduce noise from 2 chillers and rooftop mechanical equipment at that time. And it was actually set forth in condition number 14. Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, applicant shall investigate such reasonable methods as may be appropriate to reduce the noise level from the project, particularly focusing on rooftop mechanicals and chillers. Said investigation will be in conjunction with the city engineering department. If said investigation finds that noise levels can be reduced without unreasonable cost to the applicant, said measures shall be made a part of the approval, and said modifications shall be included as part of the plan. That was a condition that was narrower in scope and left to certain discretion. That's not the one that's at least being considered and apparently promoted by the board at this time with respect to this application. But it is in effect, and it remains something that the applicant remains obligated to comply with nonetheless. And that was S16.
Yeah, maybe Mr. Warner can comment on that. I'm sorry, Mr. Warner. Mr. Weber, I'm sorry, could comment on that.
And that's the focus of the consultant for the acoustics on S3, is to have a condition of approval that's tailored to the application that's before the board. The board in 2019, in August 2019, approved S16, heard from the neighbors about their concerns, and imposed a condition that was specific and focused on that which was before it. This time, the applicant is expanding that, providing the acoustical consultant willing to engage in a analysis post-approval as to the effect of S3, so that it is focused, so that we're not ending up engaged in a wholesale review of the entire campus on a limited application. Remember, this is a courtyard conference center for an existing building in a quadrangle, and yet is being used in order to develop a wholesale 90-acre campus-wide, I don't even know how many linear feet are involved, for a proposal that by our consultant has said is going to comply with the ordinance, and we will make sure it complies because we will do post-approval studies. So I would ask that the board follow its same practice that it had in S16 and remain focused on that.
Thank you.
And I don't know whether or not that whole soliloquy or that whole, not soliloquy, exchange has changed any of the board members' minds, so that we can see whether or not there is any movement to say, yeah, engaging a campus-wide for the S3 Courtyard Conference Center is really going beyond the pale. So I would ask Mr. Chairman, if possible, see if that review of S16 has helped us to focus this on a limited condition.
I guess it appears to me that the work hasn't been completed as was stipulated in the S16 approval, that it's a work in progress. And that, you know, it appears that no work has been done under that condition. And I may be wrong, Mr. Antonelli maybe can tell me about things that have been done, but it seems like nothing has happened there. I may be wrong about that.
I believe the building's under construction. Absolutely.
Jim, this is Samantha. It is under construction, but it has not been completed.
Correct.
So the work that was going to be done, the study, then work that was going to be done to try to attenuate noise and other kinds of things is incomplete. It's supposed to be done post-construction. Is that the situation that we're talking about here? It seems to me that
Exactly. That portion is one of the last things that will go in. That's my understanding. And that has not been completed yet. Of course, when the time comes, and it should be expected soon. And when I say soon, that means snow is going to go away first, of course. At that point, they would do the study and they would make sure that that piece of equipment complies.
as far as the board is concerned, anyone would like to change their opinion of having either a broader study or an hour study, and asking Mr. Weber to consult with his client about an hour study, or do you want to keep it for both? Any opinions out there? Any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Little has her hand.
Yep, sorry. Yep.
I just want to reiterate that I disagree with Attorney Weber's characterization. Both projects, both the S16 that was approved and this S3 building that's approved, are both part of the GDP, which is the broad plan that we approved for the development of the campus. So we considered the first part of the application considered by itself because it was the first part of the plan and there wasn't anything else to consider it with. Now we're coming with another part of the plan. It needs to be considered in conjunction. What is the ongoing noise concerns? Is this additional noise going to push us over the limits? That's what we're asking the applicant to investigate and to assure that to assure this board and the broader city that there's not going to be a negative impact on the residences that's around this building, an undue negative impact. And it needs to be considered as part of the whole plan. So they aren't separate applications in the same way that I disagree with the characterization that they're completely separate applications. They're both part of the GDP. Both parts were contemplated as part of the GDP. They were both specifically talked about when we approved the GDP, and I just disagree strongly with that characterization.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, as to Councilman Little's comments, and I am not looking to influence the board in any way, shape, or form, just provide factual information and legal opinion. The GDP did have a good neighbor policy as part of the GDP. It had a community facilities plan as part of the GDP. My review of the GDP as amended back up to 2019, the summer, if I recall correctly, also does, as Councilwoman Little represented, does provide for both the S3 infill addition and the S16 construction, and a general development plan is akin to a broad concept site plan for a site as a whole. And then subsequently, you have individualized site plan applications for individual components such as S16, such as S3, the subject of this hearing. So Councilwoman Little is accurate in her characterization, in my legal opinion, as to the fact that this indeed is part of a site-wide general development plan. It all flows back to that.
Okay. Thanks,
Mike
Mr.
Lieber,
Moore.
with regard, thank you. With regard to that, at the time that the board approved the GDP, that was the opportunity for the board to approve it and include a condition that would have the site-wide sound study that is being proposed at this point. Board did not, at that point, impose a site-wide sound study pre-instruction and pre or post-approval, pre-construction, post-construction.
Respectfully, I disagree with Mr. Weber. The GDP approval and the amendments thereto are general and conceptual. Certainly, the board retains the right on the scope of authority to address more specific conditions in the context of each and every site plan application subsequent to the amendment to the GDP.
If this was an amended GDP, but this is not an amended GDP, this is merely the implementation of the GDP. And as a result, the GDP does not include a condition of approval that requires the site-wide. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Mr. Weber's legal position, I disagree with it.
All right, Mr. Perella.
I just like to ask a question to Mr. Weber. I just don't understand why. I mean, Bristol Myers is a great neighbor. And I think the city is lucky. I'm not going to speak for the whole city, but I think we're lucky that they're here. I think the board has been extremely cooperative towards Celgene, Bristol Myers, all the occupants of that site. I just don't understand why they would not want to do this and not want to just put this issue to bed. This is a sound issue. A post-campus evaluation of the site would put this to bed. So I don't understand the resistance to not doing it. If I was the CEO of this company, I'd say, get it done, put it to bed, let's move on, let's make the CAR T, let's cure millions of people and move forward with our business. I just don't understand why they would not do this. And I think that's, the board would like to see that, the neighborhood would like to see that. And, we can quarrel about individual applications, but it's very difficult for the community, the board, and the town to look at this site as individual little projects and not as an overall campus. So again, I just don't understand why you wouldn't do this. If it's a cost issue, it's got to be a lot cheaper than having litigation with the city of Summit.
I think that is probably the most successful summary of review that I would at this point ask for a recess so I can speak with the BMS representatives and be able to respond to the board.
Okay, so you have the full picture there, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Perella.
All right, thank you.
You're
Let's
welcome,
take a
Mr. Weber.
10-minute break. Is that sufficient, Mr. Weber? Or
15 minutes, please, Mr. Chairman.
All right, 15 minutes. We'll reconvene at 8:46. Thank you all. Waiting for Mr. Weber here and his team. Okay. Oh, there he is. All right. So, got your team coming back, Mr. Weber?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the 15 minutes.
Sure, you bet.
We did need all 15 plus a little bit more.
All right, no problem. No problem.
BMS is willing to agree to stipulate to the condition as proposed by Mr. Warner and desired by the board. However, that determination to now deal with the site-wide sound issue has posed an issue for them, as mentioned before, in terms of the ongoing summons. They would like to see that there would be a representation that the summons could be dismissed, which I expect that once they release their reports, that will be the result. And I understand that the board, Mr. Warner, doesn't have that authority, but would be a recommendation for the dismissal. And likewise, a condition that this, if there was not a dismissal, that this agreement to this condition is not deemed an admission. Again, that is subject to Krista Anderson as the complaining witness, but I would expect that she would agree in that instance, because they do have to take the steps. There is a summons processing. They expect by agreeing to this condition that is going to put this on a pathway that's going to result in that dismissal. But to the extent that it doesn't, then they don't want to find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. So the other point is they've actually done this, the studies. The studies were done November 6th to the 7th in 2020. And they did another study December 18th to the 24th in 2020. So they would ask the board that in the imposition of the condition that they not have to do another study, but that they submit those studies to the review of the appropriate agency to assure that what their studies have shown that they are in compliance are in fact in compliance without having to go through it one more time. As the board can understand, the heightened nature of this entire process has required BMS to be cautious and conservative in their approach, but recognizing the board's concern, and I understand that it would be across the board of the board, that at this point they would like to agree to that stipulation or stipulate to a condition of approval. The board approves the application, agreeing with what Mr. Warner had said with the comments that rather than having it in 60 days, rely on the reports that have already been done in November 6 to 7, 2020 and December 8 to 24, 2020, and with the recommendation or the reference that there would be a coinciding either dismissal of the summons or a reservation that this agreement does not constitute an admission.
Mr. Warner, that sounds like a question that you could answer. I guess the first question I would have though is why are we now finding out the studies have been done, earlier? So, Mr. Warner?
As far as whether using prior studies or not, that's not a legal issue. That's a policy decision to be made by this board. Whether you wish to take the stipulation as delivered or whether to impose take it up to that point and impose the requirement of additional studies to be done post approval. That's a policy decision by the board.
It's hard to accept studies now that we haven't seen and haven't been evaluated by our third party.
That's one item, Mr. Chairman. The other item, Mr. Weber is correct that neither I nor this board has the authority to do anything with respect to the pending summons. I don't know that it's appropriate for the board to make a recommendation, even if the board wanted to, with respect to same. I would say, though, that I do believe it would be within the board's jurisdiction, or better yet, it would be within the board's authority to accept that portion of the condition being stipulated to, whereby the applicant is not making any admissions in the ongoing litigation with the city of Summit on the summons, by agreeing to this condition and going forward with, the testing and mitigation measures associated with this approval, if there is an approval. That, I think, is a reasonable request by the applicant. We can, if the board wishes to take the condition with the applicant reserving such rights and not making admissions of guilt by doing it, that's reasonable. And certainly the applicant can, make that clear to the court when it addresses the municipal court on the summons.
With regard to the statement as to the reports, Mr. Chairman, they have not been finalized because of the concern over the threat of litigation and then the arrival of the summons. They have not been finalized, so that you have these preliminary reports that are still being reviewed by their counsel before they're being finalized and being ready for distribution. So an explanation as to why they have not been distributed is because they're just not at the level that you would require if you were concerned about litigation.
I would think we need current reports rather than old reports. Have any buildings been demolished since the last the reports you're talking about?
No changes to the campus since then.
Okay.
So they
Well,
reflect the current conditions.
Okay. I mean, they seem old to me for a sound issue and all the complaints that are happening. And
only a couple.
I don't think it's a big ask. I think Andy put it really well. I don't think it's a big ask. It's a campus. You're very confident that you're going to meet the standards. So I don't understand the resistance.
Mr. Weber, I think that if the reports are preliminary, then they ought to be asked to be put on hold. And when the construction of the other buildings are finished, they should just be finished. I mean, it's like putting the cart before the horse. You're not done with construction. There are ongoing issues, the snow, whatever. Again, back to what I said before, it should be a very simple thing to just tie it all up, do an entire study, get on with solving cancer. I mean, let's not be, we're dickering, for lack of a better word, over noise. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that we're happy and we like that they're in town. But it's kind of like an end around. Well, we started reports, so we want to finish those. I mean, people are coming before the council and the board complaining about current noise, not noise measured in December. So stop the studies, wait, finish the construction, finish the studies that have already started. It's not a hard thing. You've already got the points that you're measuring, and do a full report and put the issue to bed. I don't understand why this multi-billion-dollar corporation wants to continue to have a noise issue with the city of Summit. I just don't get it.
I like that, Mr. Perella. And the issue is that I think that the original condition that Mr. Warner had proposed had a 60-day window there. So if we can extend that further,
well, I
think
it's 60 days from the end of construction.
No, he's talking 60 days post-approval.
Oh, all right. So, I mean, I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, but I think the board, the public, the city would just like to know that the noise on the campus is not violating the ordinances, it's not disturbing the peace, and that Bristol-Myers will continue to be the good neighbor that Celgene was, the corporation that they purchased, because Celgene was a fabulous neighbor, in my opinion, and I'm only going to speak for me. And so that's all we're asking. That's all we're asking. Just be a great neighbor. Finish the studies, put the issue to bed, and let's get on with the business of running a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company.
Any other board members have any thoughts with regard to the proposal Mr. Weber has put forward?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Matt.
Do you mind, Rich? Do you want to go first? Well, I mean, and just to be brief, I mean, obviously, if S3 is a part of a larger plan, which it is, to Andy's point, I mean, do we want to visit this each time the piece comes up? A new piece comes up and then we want to do a new sound. This would provide the opportunity for a longer standing run of projects. Thank you.
Let's talk about the timeline, Matthew, what you've said. You have a situation that's occurring now. You have a building S16, which is under construction. You have an S3, which is coming online. You know, what, when, and how many studies need to be done? I know Mr. Warner addressed this in terms of pre and post. So that's, you know, what's the timeline look like, and what's the number of studies need to be? So I don't know if anyone wants to comment or address that, but it seems like it's multiple things. Mr. Fiore.
I don't know if the question's been asked, and if it has, I apologize. Do we have a measurement of what the noise is now from the existing building, since you're redoing an existing building?
What we have is the report from George Pernius, that's the regional health who did the studies that ended up, it was all under. We have the study from December 24th, which would be 2 months ago, which is expected to show compliance. What we could do is present those reports, make sure that they are acceptable. So we have a starting point that then satisfies the post-approval pre-construction of S3.
I mean, I'm just trying to be like common sense, right? So if you've got existing infrastructure there and existing machinery, if the proposed machinery, I'm assuming it's newer, there's a sensitivity to noise. If it can be demonstrated that that machinery is less of a noise issue for that building, I think that's a valid point. But at the end of the day, I agree with Matt and Andy. I mean, we're kind of ant farming. At the end of the day, when all of this is done, if we have a magic wand and we can go into the future, we have to measure around the perimeter of the campus to make sure once all the construction is done that we're within limits, right?
Right, but and Rich, to your point, and what Mr. Weber was starting to say is, and what Bill alluded to, we don't want Bristol Myers to continuously do study after study after study. I mean, their current studies that we were presented to the board that were sent by Chris, they're below the current ordinances. So my personal opinion, and the board can obviously, other people can have their own opinion. I think Mr. Weber's point is we have a starting point. Bristol Myers has done studies recently that show the campus is in compliance. All we're asking for is once the buildings are built, once the rest of the development is done on site, Bristol Myers then goes back and then updates the studies, or at least that's what I'm asking, goes back and updates the studies and says, hey guys, we put up S3, we put up S6, we plan on putting up whatever. We're telling you we're going to put equipment that will be compliant, and we're going to verify it with an updated study. But yes, we have to have a point of reference. And the point of reference is what?
I'm in agreement with you, Andrew. I was just speaking specifically to this building, and we can put that, you know what I mean? It just gives us markers, but you're right.
And we don't know.
It's just a cumulative, sorry, it's just a cumulative analysis, you know, it's the cumulative measurement of the campus. That's the bottom line at the end.
Right, and I agree with that. And so we don't know, we're never gonna know what S3 is until it's finished. But at least if we have a basis point of the campus, and then we ask it to be updated when the rest of the construction is done, then everybody knows that Bristol Myers did what they said. They said they were going to put equipment on S3 that made the noise within the city's ordinances. They updated their study. The study said it's below the ordinance. Then the issue's put to bed. It's a very simple thing.
So Andy, what you're saying is, you know, S16 will be finished, I think we heard sometime in the next few months. You may want to study then. When S3 is finished, you may want to update the study at that point. After each building is completed. Not to wait until S3 is.
No, I'm not saying that, Bill. I'm not saying we need a study every single time the building is done. I'm saying we should wait. We have a basis now. They're in compliance. They're telling us, they're stipulating that the equipment that they're going to put on the building will make sure that the ordinance, it complies with the ordinance. So what I'm saying is when S16, when the buildings are done, then Bristol Myers should have an obligation to then update the campus-wide noise study when all the buildings are complete, so that the neighborhood and the city knows that they put the right equipment in and the noise is compliant. I don't think we want to make them do each individual building, because then we don't have a campus-wide thing. They're stipulating that they're going to put equipment in that complies with the noise.
Well,
I would wait until it's all done.
I would simply say I'd like to see it done after each building, but I understand your point. So let's see any other members of the board have any comments on this approach, which is basically to summarize that the studies have been done. They'd like to be submitted for us to review, but it takes time to review those studies. Suppose we don't agree. Suppose we have to hire a third party to analyze the studies, perhaps, and we don't agree with what was done. I'm not sure where that leads us.
If that's the case, I'm authorized to say that they'll do another study at that point. If that's needed, but they believe that the studies that are in the process of being finalized will be sufficient to establish that benchmark.
Bill, I think that, yeah, we should have the studies should be accepted, subject to us having an independent review of them. We haven't seen them. We're not the experts. I think they have to be reviewed, and if they're acceptable, then we continue along the path that Andy has laid out. I want to comment on the other 2 points regarding the pending summons. As I think Steve said, we're not in a position to address that anyway. I wouldn't think. I'd be shocked if anyone felt otherwise. And the concept of not making an admission regarding this, I think, to me, is acceptable. Again, there are enough lawyers here to probably weigh in as to the significance of that, but I don't think we're in a position of dealing with admissions of guilt or not admissions of guilt. Let's deal with the studies. Let's get those get those in a form where we're comfortable. And as Andy said, give us a baseline today, and then get the buildings built, and we'll survey the entire campus, as has been said. It seems to me the way to go.
And I guess from the perspective of the neighbors, how long are we talking about here in terms of when the second building is done, which is why I'm suggesting maybe if S16 is done, maybe update the study, and when S3 is done, you update the study, so you're kind of incrementally going along. I think and this is a personal opinion, I think what we have is having stood there and listened to it, we have ordinances on a statewide level that are insufficient. The decimal levels are set too high, but that's a personal opinion. I
would not be opposed to having it redone after S16 is closer to many of the residents, more involved, bigger project. Sure. I mean, again, we need to get, as Andy keeps saying, let's get this behind us too. Not just
the S16
DFMS's best interest. I think it's in the city's best interest.
I'm okay with that too.
With some facts and some data and some real work, as opposed to heat.
The S16 to me is still something that I'm still a little concerned about in terms of what ultimately happens on that section of the campus in terms of landscaping and so on and so forth. And I think when Mr. Weber presents his witness back again, we may want to ask that witness about sound attenuation, perhaps. So other board members have any comments before we turn it back to Mr. Weber and or Mr. Warner?
I don't know enough about the studies, but how much do these studies cost? What do we?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
They're cheaper than a lawsuit. I mean, seriously, they're cheaper than a lawsuit.
Well, it's I think rather than saying it that way, Andy, what I would say is that that corporation has sufficient assets to conduct this study several times, in fact, daily for the rest of our lives. So they're not worried about that. Any other members, Council Member Little, any comments or questions with regard to what we're hearing here?
I mean, I agree with some of the comments made here. I'm willing to accept the study, given that we have an independent review and look to see that it's sufficient for our needs. And if it's not, then we will discuss that. But if there's a recent study done in December, I would be interested in seeing the results of that.
Okay, all right. That makes sense to me. Any other questions or comments on the S16 situation with how it's proceeding construction-wise and or mitigation-wise from anybody? All right, so Mr. Warner, given what you have heard here from the board's perspective, where do you think we stand at this point?
Mr. Weber, given that it appears as if a majority of the board, if they approve the application, would be taking the condition with the preliminary or the initial testing, accepting the previously done in November, December testing as the initial testing, subject to their independent review and reservation of the board and the professionals' rights to require additional testing. And then I'm asking if then the applicant will engage in that same process of testing and mitigation if necessary, both after S16 is constructed and after S3 is constructed, the final to be the campus or the complete campus-wide testing, those 3 timeframes. And the board certainly will, in the context of the condition, they'll accept that the applicant is not making any admissions of guilt vis-a-vis the municipal court proceedings, but the board will not make any recommendations with respect to same. Is that acceptable by the applicant by way of stipulation without the board having to impose such a condition?
Thank you, Mr. Warner. And I appreciate all of the board's comments, and I appreciate their willingness to accept the existing studies. With regard to the discussion that the board members had as to when to conduct that post-approval campus-wide study, and I recognize the chairman saying, I want to see what happens with S16. Perhaps a limited review post S16 would be appropriate rather than doing a full review. And that way to assure that those properties close to S16 are not adversely affected. And then at the conclusion of S3 to then conduct the campus-wide renewal of the sound study.
I think S16, I don't think anybody cares if it affects the Volvo dealer. So I think
sorry,
they're more.
Mr. Chairman, could you just repeat that? There's a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. With regard to S16, I'm being a smart aleck. I'm sorry. With regard to S16, I don't think anybody cares how much the sound affects the Volvo dealer. My point is, and I'm agreeing with Mr. Weber here, that if you're going to do the testing on a somewhat limited basis, it needs to be the testing that's along where the residents are, the commercial traffic, given where the S16 is relative to where S3 is. Commercial, I'm less concerned about noise on the other side of Morris Avenue than I am as it relates to the neighborhood. So, Mr. Weber, I would like to see that if it was limited, that it would be in the neighborhood area, and you can neglect, as far as I'm concerned, what's on Morris Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's acceptable.
Thank you.
One last thing, if it proves after the campus-wide study that the sound level is too high, would they agree to attenuate the sound in some fashion so that they bring it down to the acceptable?
Thank you. They've already taken steps, even though the position is that they are in compliance. As indicated by the mayor, the BMS is changing a motor on S7, preparing customized baffles for the S7 air handling. So they are willing to take those steps as are necessary. They'll be in compliance with the ordinance, and that's what we're allowed to say at this point.
Right. Board Member Ashman, my understanding by that condition was that the testing and the mitigation implementation of the mitigation measures are ongoing in each step. Initially, as well as after S16, as well as after S3. It's not just testing. It's if the testing reveals that they're exceeding the levels, they have to implement the mitigation measures and retest to demonstrate that they're below or at or below the maximum level.
I think that's right, Mr.
Correct. That's acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Weber and Mr. Chairman and everybody.
So, all right, I think we're good there. Now, where are we? Again, I keep coming back to S16. Ms. Alfonso, you were saying that with regard to the completion of S16, that the mitigation that was discussed several months ago when that was approved will be put in place, will be examined, will be, I'm just concerned about what happens since that's relatively close to the neighbors. And, personally, I'd like to see some landscaping over there that blocks some sound, and maybe we can hear some testimony from our sound consultant as to whether that would be an effective measure or not.
Perhaps Janos could speak to any additional buffering that they may be considering. But with regard to the S16 application, as can be seen in the resolution, that condition required, and of course BMS is going to comply with that condition, that they need to consider any attenuating capabilities to reduce the noise on that equipment. And it's the rooftop chiller equipment. Once they get to the point where they're looking at the specifications for that detail, they would provide that information to, I believe, Chris Stewart, if I am recalling correctly here. And of course, it also provides that they would comply with the ordinance.
All right, any other questions from the board with regard to that? Is everybody comfortable with that?
Mr. Chairman, I had two other conditions that I just wanted to put out there, if I may. One, candidly, the applicant's counsel provided a condition of approval. I just wanted to confirm that they'll stipulate to that as an additional condition of approval, that being BMS will contract with an established and reputable manufacturer of cooling towers whose equipment specifications are binding and compliant with meeting the decibel limits established in the Summit ordinance and the state regulations.
Okay.
I would add to that, Mr. Warner, as set forth in the report of Mr. Zabora, dated February 22, 2021, and that the equipment would be of equal quality to that set forth in that report. And that provides the additional specifications that would be appropriate.
I appreciate that. And then the other, as Mr. Chairman, you, I believe, alluded to, would the applicant also consider, should the board so desire, if the board approves the application, a landscaping plan, be it a row or of arborvitae or what have you? I'm not a landscape architect. I'm about as much of a landscape architect as I am a sound engineer. But 8 to 10 feet at planting might be an appropriate planting height to further mitigate sound, as well as to mitigate glare and any other visual detrimental visual impacts of the proposed development. Would that be something the applicant could consider and stipulate to?
I think that's a good suggestion. I think that would go a long way to making the neighbors feel a little more comfortable with it. And Janos, you and I can, as soon as the snow melts, you and I can get out there, plant some arborvitaes together, double row. It'd be a lot of fun. We could do it over a weekend.
Now, I just have some questions. Where are these arborvitae being planted? And I have my own plants, so I'm not being volunteered. Are we talking along Lincoln, or are we following the John Linson report dated February 4th, 2021, and making it subject to the review and approval of John Linson?
That's a good question. Yes,
whatever
sir.
the board desires, but certainly we, if we don't have a specific location, it might be prudent to follow our city forester, if I recall correctly.
And there was a landscape plan that was being implemented by Bristol Myers along Lincoln and Madison Avenue. The plan did not get implemented before winter arrived, but they do have a landscape plan that they're proposing to install along Lincoln and Madison. So to the extent that we can have that subject to the review and approval of John Linson consistent with S3, then that may be the best way to move that ahead.
I don't know what the plan looks like, but
It's substantial.
it sounds like it's reasonable. In other words, planting would begin when we get the snow off the ground and when it's, a reasonable time to start planting again.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to get us bogged down anymore. So
we have a couple of stipulations here, and I guess the question is relative to how we proceed from here. Do we need more testimony from your additional witnesses, Mr. Weber?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, is Mr. Zabora done with his direct testimony?
Yeah, that was where I was headed with that.
I would submit Mr. Zabora to the questioning of the board. I have no further questions.
Okay.
And then certainly the usual, Mr. Chairman, board professionals, members of the public, including counsel for the neighboring objector.
All right. So any board members have questions of Mr. Zern relative to his testimony? Okay. And not hearing any, how about
Councilwoman Little? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Matthew, sorry, I didn't see you there. Yeah.
Chairman Anderson, I had a couple questions if I may.
Sure. Good, thanks.
Mr. Zabora, the noise estimates that you did that these coolers on S3 would contribute 42 decibels in some places in the 40s. Were you considering the noise levels that already exist on the campus, or are those just for the coolers that are anticipated to go onto S3?
This is just for the new equipment, so the cooling towers and the rooftop equipment that's on S3.
So if there is other ambient noise that already exists on the campus, the addition of these coolers may result in higher noise levels than the noise levels that were presented to us. Is that correct?
It's possible. It depends on where that noise is coming from and how intense it is at whatever given receiver it is at.
Okay. The current noise ordinances for evening in the town of Summit is 50 decibels. Is that correct?
50, and that's at nighttime from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.
And that's when the noise reports that were done by the Department of Health, those were nighttime noise ordinances, and we saw that several of those were in the high 40s, so right up against that limit. Is there? So that's the correct that I have.
I haven't reviewed them beyond what we saw briefly on the screen here, but that's what I saw as well.
Okay, so any additional noise we may get a situation where it's over that limit. So that's why this concern over noise. And then would you expect that planting a thick layer of vegetation along the perimeter may mitigate the noise that is measured out, in the residence areas?
I can't speak to existing noise that's out there. We didn't do those studies. I don't think it would do much for rooftop noise because that equipment is up on a roof. It's going to be over the vegetation, unless, of course, the receiver was right by the vegetation. So if you're right in front of that, plantings, then you might get a little bit. But generally, foliage doesn't give you a whole lot of decibel reduction. It's more of a visual screen, out of sight, out of mind. People aren't as bothered by the noise because they can't see it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Little, any other questions? All right, other members of the board, questions? Sorry, other members of the board, Matthew, you were in queue there?
No, Chairman, I was just pointing out Councilwoman Little's hand being raised. I'm sorry.
I can't see everybody. I have to kind of scroll back and forth here so I see everybody. Anyone else have a question for this witness? Looking around, Mr. Zabora, let's see here if we have any other takers here. All right, I think we're good there. All right, so at this point, let's have any objection, Mr. Weber or Mr. Warner. We guess we'll open it up to the public. Any questions for Mr. Zabora?
Mr. Chairman, I did have a question or two for Mr. Zabora, if neither of our other board professionals have any.
I keep forgetting that you're one of our, consultants. I apologize.
That's okay. It's because I'm so shy. I never speak up. I'm like a potted plant. I know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That was my thought as well.
Yeah, that describes you fully, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But not hearing Mr. Behrens or Mr. Dower object, I'll jump in again with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Please do. Yes.
The noise exhibit A. I've lost track of the exhibit. The gentleman from Westfield's exhibits. A7. Mr. Zabora, if I read those correctly, they showed some measurements in excess of 50 dBA, which is both the state and the city of Summit's maximum for nighttime decibel levels. Did you review those at all?
I have not reviewed those, but I will comment that 50 decibels occurs at 10 p.m. So if those readings were before 10 p.m., the limit would be 65.
Yeah, I candidly could not tell from 59 Madison Avenue or 253 Kent Place. There was no indication to me whether they were daytime or nighttime measurements. At least I couldn't see them on the fly when I looked at this. Although time on site 10:15 p.m. completion time, it looks as if it was done at night. December 7th, 2020, 10:15 p.m. to 12:05 a.m. Last I checked, that's evening. So if it exceeded, if it was done nighttime and it exceeded 50 dBA, that would be exceeding the state and city of Summit ordinance levels by virtue of that testing. Would that be correct?
Well, it also depends on what that test was. If it was the total sound, that's not necessarily means they're in violation. It's only the contribution from the site is 50. So you would have to take that total sound and subtract out the neighborhood residual sound to get your contribution. And the contribution is what's subject to the codes.
And that's what, if I may, Councilwoman Little, I think was essentially asking you was, isn't this an incremental thing? Isn't it, for lack of a better phrase, sometimes you hit the straw that broke the camel's back. It might not have broken the camel's back in and of itself, but if there are a million straws on that camel's back, that last one, the millionth one, might be the one that breaks that camel's back. Isn't there validity to looking at all the noise that's emanating from the site holistically as opposed to incrementally, because one could say everything individually is only at 49 dBA, not 50 dBA. But of course, if you take it cumulatively, which is what actual people hear, it could be at 150 dBA. Isn't that accurate?
If it was at 150 dBA, your head would explode. But I take
right
your
now,
point.
I think, after this goes on much longer. But
but yes, and I think that's what the post-installation testing will handle. It'll handle the total noise from the site, and not just looking at it in a vacuum.
So there's validity to not taking out other site portions of the site, the noise emanating from other portions of the site. There's validity in taking a look at the total dBA from the totality of the noise emanating from the site on a site-wide basis, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and indeed, that may have been the case in that exhibit A7 that the gentleman from Westfield measured when he measured at night something in excess of 50 dBA. There was validity to that measurement, even though it may have been not on an incremental basis, but on a more cumulative basis, correct?
Yeah, and again, not seeing that report, I don't know that 50 dBA is total or if it's total contribution. There is a difference. You have to subtract out residual.
But total is still,
if I can, Mr. Warren,
noise, correct?
Mr. Zabora was brought in to review the specifications of the cooling tower. He was not brought in to be as an expert on the overall campus or with regard to the study that was performed by the regional health people. It was really limited as to the S3 cooling towers and mechanical equipment.
I'm very much aware of that, Mr. Weber, but as you're aware, you introduced that exhibit and this is your sound engineering expert, so it's fair game. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Weber and Mr. Warner. All right, so Mr. Nicola, shall we open this up to members of the public? And might I just say, I guess with regard to Mr. Angeli, if there are members of the public who were in a queue, not that you asked questions the first time, not 1 through 8, but if you're in a queue and you wanted to ask questions of Mr. Angeli, I understand Mr. Weber is going to make him available, as well as questions for our sound engineer. Do you want to do it in sequence? Sound engineer first, followed by Mr. Angeli.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, it'd be most efficient just to let them ask questions of one, the other, both, since they're both here, to
Yeah.
expedite matters.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't want to mix apples and oranges, but in essence, we can do that. I think that's most efficient. For members of the public, if you did ask a question last time, please, unless you have a different question, please don't re-ask the same question. And for members of the public also, we are asking questions of Mr. Angeli, who is the engineer for the site. And we are also asking questions of the sound engineer, who's recently testified with regard to the equipment on S3. And let's open it up, Chris, and see what we have.
All right, Mr. Schmidt is first. He represents a objecting neighbor.
And also with regard to members of the public, if someone else has asked a question, please don't re-ask the same question. If you could do that, it would make things more efficient. The board members are here to represent everyone, the city and everyone as well. So, Mr. Schmidt, you're representing, as an attorney, I guess, Mr. Warner, representing a client.
I think Mr. Schmidt could remind us who he represents.
All right.
Can we, I'm seeing a screen of somebody's. Is
Yeah,
there
I
a
have
reason-
to. I don't know what this is here. I see Mr. Schmidt up here. One of his screens.
Am I?
Mr. Schmidt, you're on mute.
Hello?
How's that now?
Now we can hear you. Do you want that screen off the screen?
No, I will take it off. I apologize.
And who do you represent again, Mr. Schmidt?
I'm representing Francesca McBride, 249 Kent Place Boulevard in Summit.
Okay, and do you have questions of Mr. Zabura, the sound engineer?
Yes, of Mr. Zimbor.
Okay, oh, I think he just became a member of a famous rock band from New Jersey, but I think it's Mr. Zibora, but.
Okay, Mr. Zabor, I apologize.
We still have his computer screen here. I'm sorry.
I apologize. Is that better?
That's better on my end.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zabor, when you did your study, it was based on the simply based upon the specifications for the cooling towers that the manufacturer put out, correct?
That is correct.
And you did not do any type of correlation between the sound that might be emanating from the cooling tower with existing noise on the facility. Is that correct?
Correct. We did not consider an existing noise, just the new noise.
Do you have, can we get his report up? I apologize. I no way of getting it onto the screen, particularly the chart, if that's possible.
Chris, can you do that?
Yeah, Sam was sharing the screen first.
Oh.
Do you have it? Looks like it.
Right there. Okay. Mr. Zabora, you have at least one residential area that has a dB of 50 decibels, correct?
That's correct.
And it doesn't indicate in your report whether that would be 50 decibels being emitted during the day or at night. Can you tell us what time of day that would have been?
We were assuming that all equipment was operating and for the purposes of the study at night.
Okay, so this would have been at least one resident who would have been experiencing a decibel level that is at the maximum permitted by the ordinance. Is that fair?
That is correct. And that's at the top story of that receiver, not on grade. On grade, it would be quieter. On the
Okay.
property line, it would be quieter.
On grade, it would have been quieter, but what if it's a 2 or 3 story house?
Yeah, that's why we looked at that 50 decibels is across Morris Ave in that plaza. I believe it's called the Promenade, the top story of those apartments.
What about the residences behind Bristol Meyer? Are any of them 2 or 3 stories high?
I believe most of the single family homes are 2 to 3 stories high.
Okay. Now, as I understand sound, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this is just based upon having represented people in the past that had sound engineers, when you add sound, if one particular machine is giving off 10 decibels and you add a second machine that's giving off 10 decibels, that doesn't necessarily mean that the total noise will be 20 decibels, but it'll be something between 10 and 20. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that if you added the 50 decibels of noise that you're projecting from these cooling towers onto noise that's currently existing, would you agree that that combination of noise would exceed the permitted decibels?
It depends what the contribution of existing sound is at that point.
Okay.
S3 is the closest building to that receiver, and currently there's nothing operating on S3.
Now, when you do your sound testing, do you consider sound other than the equipment that's part of the building, the sound, the chillers and the air conditioning units?
For the purpose of this study, we only modeled the new equipment proposed for the building.
Well, for
we did not take any measurements.
Okay, but would it be fair that when you're doing your sound studies that you would also take into consideration such things as the backup beepers from trucks?
We were not asked to look at that for this evaluation.
By the way, as a sound expert, do you know what the standard or required OSHA backup decibel is for a truck?
No.
Is it
I don't believe OSHA specifies the level that it needs to emit.
Are they in excess of 85 decibels?
Could be, depends on the backer.
And if it's in excess of 85 decibels, that exceeds the ordinance regardless of whether it's day or night, correct?
Objection. He's already indicated that he has limited his study to the review of the rooftop equipment, and he has indicated that he does not have information with regard to the backup beepers. We're moving beyond his direct testimony.
He's an expert in the field. Simple
We're
question.
moving beyond his direct testimony.
Mr. Chairman, if you're looking for guidance from me, I think it's a reasonable question, given the line of questioning and the reason he's been offered as an expert and the prior factual testimony with respect to backup beepers. So in my legal opinion, the board can allow the line of questioning.
Okay. Mr. Zambori, can you try to answer Mr. Schmidt's question?
Whether or not it's over 85 does not mean it's that level at the receiver. It's highly dependent on where that beeper is on the site. And it has an effect of the distance between the two. I can't comment on what the level would be from a backup alarm at any of these receivers.
Okay.
I can comment on that your client is a good 3,000 feet away from this building, so I don't think they'll be impacted by the cooling towers on S3.
If you were only engaged to determine what the noise of the cooling tower for S3 was, how do you know exactly where my client is located?
I just Googled your client's address while we were talking and did a distance on the screen here.
I see.
So I can say that at that location, it's much further away than the levels that we reported and would therefore be much lower than the levels we reported in our report here.
Lower for the building S3, correct?
Correct. The S3 contribution will be much lower.
But not necessarily for the buildings adjacent to their home, correct?
That I cannot comment on.
No, but you can comment they're 3,000 feet away, but you can't comment about the noise being emitted from the buildings that are close to them. Is that fair?
That's correct. We didn't study those buildings.
You indicated that you did not believe that plantings would do much good for the units on the roof of a building. Are you familiar with things that are, and I'm going to probably identify it incorrectly, but aren't there acoustical type walls that can be placed around machines to dampen the sounds?
There certainly are.
Do you know whether any of the plans for S3 or any of the other buildings have any acoustical type walls that are considered to be placed around the air conditioning units to help deaden the noise?
Again, I can only comment on S3, but no, I do not believe there are any sound barriers on the S3 roof at this point.
Do you think that adding such barriers around the cooling towers on the roof would, in fact, deaden some of the excess noise that's being emitted?
It could reduce the noise, but it's to be, we're not showing that it is an excess noise at this point. That would be determined by the post-installation sound study, and certainly something that could be considered to treat equipment if needed.
In connection with your report, did you review the township ordinances in Summit, the noise ordinances?
The noise ordinance, yes.
And you are aware of section 3-8.1A that says the following acts are prohibited: disturbing the peace and quiet of the city or any neighborhood, family, or person within the city by any loud or unnecessary noise or knowingly to permit such noise. Did you read that?
That sounds accurate.
And are you aware that there's no decibel limit affixed to that section of the ordinance?
Well, the decibel limits are introduced later, and I'll also state that all local ordinances need to be approved by DEP.
I need one speaker, please, Mr. Chairman.
My question was very simple. You're aware that that section of the ordinance does not include any decibel limits?
It does
Yes or
not.
no?
They are introduced later.
They're introduced in different sections of the ordinance, correct?
And by the state DEP, which has to approve all local ordinances.
The state DEP has to approve ordinances? Are you
That's
acting
correct.
as a lawyer now?
That's the procedure of noise regulation adoption in the state of New Jersey. It has to be passed through the DEP for approval.
DEP has to approve disturbing of the peace ordinances? That's your testimony?
They have to approve the decibel limits in the noise ordinance.
Not
To
my
make sure they are
question, sir.
consistent with the scheme.
I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Is your testimony that DEP controls disturbing the peace ordinances?
My testimony is that they have to review any decibel limitations in ordinances.
And you also agreed with me that there are no decibel limits in the disturbing of the peace ordinance in Summit, correct?
Objection.
They're still within section 3.8, which is the overall noise control section.
Okay. Typically when you do a sound study, do you pick certain times during the day when you would do it? Or is it your sound machines left out for a lengthy period of time, 24 hours, 48 hours?
Objection with regard to the question. We are moving well beyond the scope of his study. Scope of his study was to review the specifications for the proposed cooling tower to be able to provide the representation to the board that the installation of the cooling tower will be consistent with the City of Summit's noise ordinance. We're well beyond that now, and we're going into how Mr. Zabora conducts sound studies, not what he was retained for, not the subject of his direct testimony, or we're going way beyond S3 at this point.
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Weber, the board has had a stipulation presented and adopted by Bristol Myers Squibb. And I think what the board has to take into consideration is, is this sound study going to be done at a time during the day when they just happen to know there are no trucks on the property or the chillers are at low temperature, say 6 in the morning? Or is it going to be a study that's conducted throughout the entire day so that you get a true picture of what this facility is like?
The determination as to the sufficiency of the sound study, and that sound study has been represented to be acceptable. It has not been admitted at this point because the application has not been approved and the board has not adopted the condition of approval at this point. However,
Mr. Chairman, if I
they-
may, Mr. Schmidt, if your questioning is related to the condition of approval, if there is an approval and that condition is accepted as stipulated, the City of Summit will have an enforcement agency, whether it be city or otherwise, that it can rely on to confirm that the testing is done sufficiently, et cetera. So I would submit that that line of questioning might not be necessary, might be beyond the scope at this point.
Well, I'm just suggesting that the board at least recommend in connection with the adoption of this condition that the study be over a sufficiently lengthy period of time and not pigeonholed to times, specific times when the campus may be quiet.
And that sufficient time period will be determined by the enforcement agency that the board and the city will rely on if indeed it's there's an approval and the stipulations accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Warner.
Duly noted.
I have no further questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Zabira.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Nicola, our next member of the public.
Okay, next is Lisa Dixon.
Okay. Where are we there? Ms. Dixon?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Can you state your name and spell your last name for us and tell us your address?
Sure, Lisa Dixon, Dickson, 69 Madison Avenue.
Great, thank you.
And my question is along the same lines, but a little different as what was just being asked. Since we do know that there is the ordinance 3.8.1 A and B for disturbing the peace, and it specifically does name air conditioners that cannot disturb the peace. And since anyone who has stood around here knows that it certainly does disturb the peace, my question is, are there things that could be done? I don't know that anybody who's heard the videos is questioning that these things disturb the peace. Is there anything that can be done on this S3 building that would mediate the noise, not worrying about decibels? Because if we start, we've gotten so mired in decibels, and that could get us, it could be 49, it could be 50, it's still disturbing the peace. Are there things that could be done to mitigate the HVAC on S3, the cooling tower, so that it will not disturb the peace in the neighborhood?
There are some things that have already been done. Originally, when we were first brought in, the cooling tower had a regular standard fan on it, and they replaced that with the whisper quiet model, which dropped that sound by 10 or more decibels. So we have already implemented the manufacturer's noise control options for that unit.
And are there any other things? Because what you said was it wouldn't go below, it wouldn't go above the required decibels. But of course, decibels and disturbing the peace really are two completely different things. Are there additional sound blankets or barriers that could further lower that noise level?
I think I can represent that we can check back with the manufacturer and see if they have any other items that they could add to their unit. But at this time, I don't know that they have any more they can do to that model of cooling tower.
And I asked the board chair, I don't know if I can ask this. Is there a way that I can ask that would be possibly considered as a requirement? That those things be added?
Mr. Chairman, I think the applicant already stipulated to the specifications being compliant with the noise ordinances of both the state and the city. Decibels are how they're measured, how noise is measured. So certainly it's a relevant standard, and we can't impose anything more restrictive than the statewide standard. That's why our ordinance mirrors the statewide standard. But I think they've already addressed in the stipulation the specifications for the equipment.
And there's a representation, Mr. Warner, that if there's an excess, that there would be mitigation measures.
Right.
So the answer, Ms. Dixon, is we really can't, because we're relying on the state ordinances and using the decibel numbers that they have. That's really all we can ask the applicant to do, is to meet those standards. Any other questions, Ms. Dixon? She's muted. Okay, maybe not. So, Mr. Nicola, our next member of the public.
Okay. Next is Gordon Stewart.
Evening, Mr. Stewart. I think you're on mute right now. Could you give us your name and address and spell your last name for us?
Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom yet.
That's all right. How are you tonight?
I'm good.
Good.
So my name's Gordon Stewart. I live at 54 Evergreen Road. And I've got a question each for Mr. Angeli and also for the sound engineer.
Sure.
So I'll just ask them both. So for the sound engineer specifically, you mentioned earlier about the ambient noise when you were talking in general rather than about this specific project, you were referring to subtracting out the noise that was already ambient there during a course of a site-wide study. I'm wondering how you can do that, because it's not like you can turn off the whole of Bristol-Myers Squibb and say, okay, the non-Bristol-Myers Squibb noise is this, therefore the noise for Bristol-Myers Squibb as a whole is something else. Because while you can certainly turn off one building, I don't see how you can, how do you do that subtraction? Because I just don't see how that can be done.
Sure. So I'll answer that, and then you can ask your other question of the other witness. The guidance from DEP in that matter is if you cannot turn the source off, you're supposed to find another place in the community where you can't necessarily hear, in this case, the BMS site, but would have the same exposure to traffic noise, aircraft, and whatnot. So you would seek out a neighborhood residual location to get that reading. So that's something you really have to do when you're on the site and you can hear what's going on and kind of investigate around before you can find that location.
Okay. I mean, that sounds very good in theory. As a scientist, I find that somewhat.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stewart, this is the time for questioning, due process. When it's time for public comment, you'll be sworn in, you could testify.
Okay. And then for Mr. Angeli, last time he mentioned that he had not been on the roofs of all the buildings on the campus, which I can certainly understand. There's a lot of buildings. But he did state that a roof permit was required to go on to the roofs, and that I can also understand. This was in the context of, are there structures and baffles in place around the sound emanating equipment on top of various buildings? It would seem to me that you don't really need to go on top of a building to be able to tell whether there are baffles and other sound deadening equipment on top of a building, because you can see those from the ground. I mean, I can look out my window and look at buildings, and if I had the knowledge of what sound baffling equipment looked like, I would be able to tell what that was. So how can one not know, as the site engineer, what buildings have or don't have sound baffling equipment on them?
Objection as to setting forth the argument to begin with the question. If you can answer the remaining question, please, Mr. Angeli.
So, for example, building S7, which is our largest building, that roof is close to 70 feet in the air. I can't even see up to it. And it's so broad, I couldn't tell you where some of the equipment is located on that roof, because I've never went on there, because that's one of our lab buildings that you need a permit to go on there. And so hence, in the 5 years we've been there, I have not had to go up onto that roof. So I couldn't tell you what equipment's on there or not.
Okay. I mean, I could imagine from Mr. McBride's residence, you could probably tell that there's equipment on there or not. Okay. All right, I guess I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Nicola, another member of the public?
I don't see any other hands up. Oh, there is one, a few more. I would note that Lisa Dixon has her hands up. She might have been muted at the time she was trying to finish her testimony before, or her comments or questions, I should say.
All right. You want to put her in the queue now?
Sure.
Ms. Dixon, did you have your button on mute there and weren't able to ask a follow-up question? We just want to be sure that you got to ask the questions that you had in mind.
No, that is correct. I wasn't able to unmute again. I do have a question, but I don't know, according to procedure, if I can ask it. It's actually for Mr. Warner. Am I able to ask a question in response to what you said?
I think it'd be good to ask Mr. Warner a question. Yeah.
Your discretion, but if go ahead.
No, I'm happy to see him squirm. So go ahead and ask him a question.
Not my point, but you had said, I'm looking at the 3-8.1, and it does say disturbing the peace, the operation of any air conditioner so as to annoy or disturb the comfort, repose, peace, or sleep of any person. And for those of us who live in this area, it has certainly surpassed that dramatically since November.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Dixon, in fairness, we can't testify. Did you have a question of me?
Yeah, I did. My question, well, it was in response to what you had said, was that it's only measured by decibels. And I'm wondering if there is a way that it can be, since disturbing the peace by decibels is not necessarily disturbing the peace and interfering with.
Mrs. Dixon, let me answer the question that you're posing, and that is that you're asking about a general police power disturbance of the peace ordinance that is a subject, I think, of a municipal court proceeding right now, but nevertheless, that is not the noise ordinance or the state regulation that we're referring to. Those are measured in decibels. And that is how we can enforce noise standards as a planning board with respect to applications for development that we are hearing. That other ordinance is not an ordinance that we as a planning board can enforce. So that's something else. Okay. And you and others can address it in the context of that particular ordinance, in the context of other proceedings at the municipal court.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Dixon. Okay, Mr. Nicola, next member of the public.
Okay, next is Ryan Felmet.
Where is he? There it is. Ryan, good evening. Could you state your name, spell your last name, and give us your address, please?
Sure. My name is Ryan Felmet. Address is 57 Madison Ave. Last name Felmet.
Great, thank you. I've got a question for the witnesses.
I do.
Yeah, great.
I have questions for Mr. Zabora, the sound engineer expert.
Sure, go ahead.
It's in relation to the mainly into the cooler chillers. Is it, just to clarify, for the S3 building, is it a cooler or a chiller that's being put on the rooftop?
The cooling tower.
Cooling tower. Okay. And can the cooling tower, can that be adjusted through the course of a year? Can it be adjusted on a daily, monthly, can it be adjusted throughout the season?
I'm not sure what you mean by adjusted. You mean in terms of its operation?
Yeah, like if it's a cooling tower, maybe you can explain what does a cooling tower, does it cool the facility, or what is the cooling tower's purpose? Let's start there.
Well, it's but I'm not a mechanical engineer, but it's providing cooling that's eventually going down to a chiller that's inside the building in the basement.
Right.
To help condition the building. So it will depend on how, essentially it depends on how hot it is, right? So if it's a hot day, that cooling tower is going to have to work harder to cool down the building. If it's a cool day or cool night, it won't have to work as hard, and there won't be as many fans running.
Understood. Yeah, I recall you saying that it depends on the kind of the heat during your testimony. So is it more of an automated situation as it works with the heat of the actual tower, or what's below it, or is it manually adjusted? How does
No,
it?
if I can, Mr. Warner, this is well beyond the scope of the testimony of Mr. Zabora, and we're moving into mechanical engineering. He's not offered as a mechanical engineer. And that has been provided as part of the testimony of Janos Angeli at the last hearing.
That's fine. I have more questions. Okay, if I can move on to my next questions, is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, great. So as you said, during warmer, if the building's warmer, and previously during your testimony, you said during summer months. So would that mean that during colder months that the cooling chillers would be probably less used at less capacity, based on your earlier testimony saying that when it's warmer during summer months, you said that it's used at a higher frequency. So that would mean, and I'm asking you, in a cooler temperature such as the winter, would it be used at a less capacity from your experience?
Again, if I indicate that Mr. Zabora was offered as an acoustical engineer, we're moving into mechanical engineering.
From a sound perspective, that's what I'm asking the question.
Well, from a sound perspective, so what we modeled was the worst case design day conditions. So any time beyond that when it is cooler, I would expect the cooling tower to operate at either a lower speed or half load, and would be quieter outside of design day conditions.
Okay, and a cooling tower, from a sound perspective, does a cooling tower give off the most noise related to the S3 unit that you observed?
From the additional units we calculated, yes, the cooling tower was the loudest piece of equipment up there. We also considered the condensing units and exhaust fans and indoor air handling units.
Okay, and then previously you had comments about the perimeter and vegetation as sound mitigation. So I just wanted to ask, as a sound expert, are there any other sources of sound mitigation, sound barriers that were looked at or are looked at often in this industry to attenuate sound?
Objection. This is the sort of repetitive and redundant testimony that's already been asked and answered of him.
Oh, what was the previous answer then?
Are we going to be repeating the transcript of the testimony of the hearing?
Which hearing?
This hearing.
It's probably a pretty simple question.
Yeah, one of the other members of the public asked the question, but Mr. Zabor, if you don't mind answering again.
I guess I'll answer it maybe a different way. So there's kind of three paths of noise control. There's source treatments, path treatment, and receiver treatments. It's always best to treat the source first when you can. That's quieter fans and so forth. And then path treatments like sound barriers or foliage to a certain extent, that would be the secondary thing to look at. And then finally, you would look at the receiver. But this isn't a situation like a factory where you would be putting, you're not going to hand earplugs to the residents. But if we were in a factory environment, the last step of analysis would be to provide hearing protection.
Okay, that's an interesting answer. Thanks.
And we're not suggesting that here. Just that's
I understand.
Source, path, receiver. That's kind of the process we go through.
Okay. And so another question, I think it's obvious, your analysis of the sound coming from S3 does not relate to any prior sound studies from any other buildings on campus, correct?
That's correct. It's exclusively S3 proposed.
Okay, so then I would just mention to the board if the sound is, if the chillers are being
Mr. Fellman, if you're going to ask Mr. Zabur a question?
Yeah, I'm going to ask him a question. I just have quick sentence, last question, I'm done. The sound's being automatically adjusted via the chiller usage throughout the year during the heat and coolness. And the community's having issues with noise in the winter. Any sound study done in the winter would probably be less. So I asked if Mr. Zabora would agree from a sound perspective, if there was a sound study that was done, would it be less stressful on the surrounding neighborhood during the winter?
Again, not having seen the rest of the site, I can't really comment on that. But when we test S3, it may be possible for them to turn the equipment on purposely for the purposes of the test so that we could get a full load reading, even if that's not what the building is calling for at that particular time.
Okay. I think that's very important, that your statement about the timing of the seasons as it relates to sound. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Feldman. All right. Anyone else there? Mr. Nicola?
Yeah, next is Abe Caspo.
Good evening, everybody. My question is to
Your address first, please.
Just state your name for us and give us your address, spell your last name. Thank you.
Abe Casbo, Kasbo, 253 Kent Place Boulevard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Mrs. Zabora, can you tell me from a sound perspective what type of maintenance is required to ensure cooling towers run efficiently and how often?
That's not a sound question. That's a mechanical equipment question. I couldn't answer that.
Okay. And how about Mr. Angeli? Maybe you can answer this one. Do you know if BMS is contracted with a firm to conduct maintenance on the S3? Like, how does this work? Once you install these things, is there a maintenance contract that goes along with this?
Mr. Warner, Mr. Casbo had testified or had questioned at the last hearing. He's now back on and he's trying to question Mr. Angeli again. He had his opportunity at the last hearing.
I'll defer to the chair. It's up to the discretion of the
Mr.
chair.
Caspo, do you have a question that would be different than the ones that you asked last time? I don't recall what you asked last time, but if you could do that, that would be helpful just for efficiency.
Mr.
I want to
Anderson,
hear your questions though.
yeah. Both questions are different than the questions I asked.
All right, good. Thank you.
So this second question is to Mr. Angeli. Do you know if Bristol Myers Squibb contracted with a firm to conduct maintenance? What does the maintenance process on these cooling towers look like? And what are you doing for S3? Because I suspect that maintenance has a lot to do with, you know, the noise, right? Or at least mitigating the noise as the system gets older or as it's being used. Is there anything being done?
Answer the question.
Yes, we do contract with maintenance companies to keep our equipment operating and making sure that it is properly operating as per the design of it.
And can you explain that just a little bit more? I mean, is there, you know, what's the maintenance schedule look like?
I'm actually unaware of the maintenance schedule for that because that's not under my jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Mr. Nicola, another member of the public? Or are you through, sir, with your question?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you. All right. Mr. Nicola, another member of the public?
Yeah, next is Tim Smith.
Good evening, Mr. Smith. I think you're on mute there.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
the default.
great.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks
Can
for
you
my
give
question.
us your name and address?
Yep.
I know it's stupid to ask you to spell your last name, but if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure. My name is Tim Smith, last name Smith. I live at 247A Kent Place Boulevard. I had a quick question for Mr. Zabura. The question is, with the HVAC on S3, there's also a loading dock, I believe, on that building or planned for that building, as well as a compactor. And I know that some of the trucks going in and out of the loading dock add some noise, as I imagine would a compactor. I'm not a sound expert, so I'd just be curious if HVAC noise plus compactor plus a loading dock would be additive in terms of the sound that they produce.
Yeah, the compactor is actually in our model as well, so those results include compactor noise. We did not evaluate truck noise, however.
Thank you.
Was that it, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, those were my only questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have a good evening. All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, can I ask a question of the applicant in light of Mr. Smith's question?
Certainly, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, it's for Mr. Weber. My recollection is that the prior resolutions of approval referenced trash compactor compliance with city and statewide noise level ordinances as well, which I think frankly would be a requirement anyway, but they were spelled out in one of the prior ordinances. And there was also reference to a time periods for operation of the trash compactor. Can the applicant stipulate that they'll be subject to the ordinances, this trash compactor, which if I recall correctly, variance is being sought for it to be unenclosed, and also that the hours of operation might be limited, I suspect, during daytime hours or something of the like?
We can agree to, of course, comply with the ordinance with regard to the compactor. As for the hours of operation, this is an office building. I would submit that the hours be limited to the hours that the building is occupied, because you may have cleaning staff there that would, on occasion, put some debris into the compactor at the end of the cleaning shift.
Given that the DEP utilizes 7 a.m. to utilizes 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., I believe, as nighttime. Can it be limited from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. For the trash enclosure to be utilized and compactor, excuse me.
From 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.?
Not to be used between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. or to be used only from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Yes.
I see Mr. Angeli is nodding his head, so yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to grab that stick. Thank you.
Any other members of the public? Oh, Councilmember Little.
I just was hoping I could ask one follow-up question on the vegetation. We heard some concerns from the neighbors about truck noise, compactor noise, those kinds of things. Would you expect that the vegetation landscaping along the perimeter may help with mitigate those types of noises?
It really depends how thick and deep it is. You know, if it's a couple trees spaced out, it's not going to do that much. But if it's really thick and dense, you might get a dB or so out of it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Nicole, any members of the public? Are we through with the members of the public, or we have a few more?
There's no new hands or no hands.
All right, excellent. That's excellent. Mr. Weber, do you have any other witnesses to call this evening?
I have available the civil engineer and the architect if the board members have any questions of them.
Okay.
Otherwise, I believe that we have the testimony of Mr. Angeli from the last hearing, which outlined in general the proposal that's been presented. But certainly if the board has any questions, without those questions, I'd be willing to submit the application.
Okay, thanks. All right, and just to be sure, any members of the board, any of our consultants have any further questions of these witnesses before we go to board deliberation?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm assuming that given we've had all the questions we've received from the public, and that Mr. Weber has essentially submitted the application, that we're ready to go to deliberations fairly soon.
Well, actually,
Ms.
Mr. Chairman, I
has a
see.
question.
Oh, sorry. Was there? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Someone else?
I have a question.
Ah, okay. Hi. Hello.
Hi. This is going to feel very out of left field, but I just wanted to know from probably Mr. Angeli if the applicant was aware that their building is eligible for the National Register, and that with that comes the opportunity to get historic tax credits, and they're 20% dollar for dollar for every dollar you spend on a rehabilitation of a building. And S3 is eligible. It was built in 1937, and it's a nice Art Deco building. But if you reskin it, you wouldn't be eligible for the tax credit. So, and also the state of New Jersey just passed a state historic tax credit that you can piggyback, which is 40%. which is real money. So I just wanted to know if they were aware of it. A lot of people aren't. It's understandable if you're not aware of it, but other big corporations like GM have similar campuses who have used it. They used it for $1 billion rehabilitation of their campus and got a roughly $200 million tax credit for that. So it's something to consider if the applicant or the BMS is unaware of it before they reskin the building.
Question for Mr. Angeli. I don't know if you've thought about it or given any consideration.
Actually, we were unaware of it, so thank you for educating us on that. We've most likely will not be doing that because we also had some issues with the exterior being as old as it is with asbestos containing material in that. So we've have done the abatement already on that. So
Caulk around the windows?
caulking and some other stuff, terracotta waterproofing, you know, so there's you know, we're looking to make it a clean building in our eyes.
Okay.
And Mr. Warner, I neglected to open it up for public statements. I was thinking that we had our questions of the last two witnesses, and I was so excited to get the board debate that I essentially, we didn't really open it up for public statements at this point.
No, we didn't, but also, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make sure there were substantial reports from our engineer, from our planner, from our city forester. Is the applicant, number one, do any of those reports require any testimony from the comments that were made by those various board professionals? I'm sure they're checking now. And two, is the applicant stipulating as a condition of approval to every item that doesn't require testimony, but that was a recommendation or a comment by those board professionals, because all those reports have to be taken into account in the deliberation by the board and in any resolution that I'm going to be drafting.
So we're talking about Mr. Dorr and Mr. Behrens, and I guess yourself to some extent.
Well, I don't have a report, but the city forester and Krista Anderson, the fire chief, the environmental commission, they all had reports.
Yeah.
How does this sound, Mr. Chairman, in response to Mr. Warner's perspicacious observation that perhaps the court reporter has we can take a break at this point. I can review the reports. Mr. Stewart can see whether or not there is something that he needs addressed, and
Mr. Behrens as well. Mr. Behrens as well. Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that? I think it's a good idea. We'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10. Why don't we just say 10:30? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see, Mr. Weber's back, and we're trying to get the crew back in place here. Looks like we've got pretty good attendance here. All right.
Maybe a quick roll call when we're ready, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, that'd be great. We're missing one or two folks. Looks like we get almost there. We get to see Mr. Weber in his office. And Mr. Weber, do you have a cot in your office? Imagine you spend some time there.
I do, Mr. Chairman. So
Don't forget Miss Alfonso. She probably spends more time in the office than Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Perella.
You're very welcome. We know you're the brains behind the power there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Means a lot.
All right. It looks like how about I think let's scanning through. I think we've got all the members of the board back in tow here. So Chris, sorry, let's see, Chris. Yeah, everybody's here. So Chris, would you run a roll call?
Sure. Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Present.
Councilmember Little,
Here.
Ms. Bolsonaro,
Here. Sorry.
You sure, Jennifer?
Ms. McNeil,
Here. Mr. Perella.
Bird,
Here.
Mr. Zucker,
Here.
Perella,
Here.
Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli,
Here.
Mr. Ashman,
Present.
and Mr. Warner is here.
All right. Excellent. All accounted for. So, Mr. Warner, given where we are, we want to tidy up the consultant reports and comments from staff, and then move from there into a public hearing. Is that the point at this point?
Sure. Just wanted to make sure any testimony that our board professionals said was necessary has been addressed and or is no longer necessary. And then make sure any of their comments are stipulated to by the applicant, or if there's anything they disagree with, let us know now or forever hold your peace.
And we have still Mr. Dorr still with us, and Mr. Barron still with us out there somewhere. And Mr. Dorr and Mr.
Maybe
Barron.
they could,
Okay, good. They're here.
maybe
All
they
right.
could let us know if there's anything more they need.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Weber.
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask that the engineer or the applicant would just state that they will comply with the state requirements for stormwater, ADA compliance for parking, and there was 2 questions regarding the employee count before and after for the building.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Dorr.
we can stipulate to the statements with regard to the statewide for stormwater. The other requirement as to ADA, agreed. And with regard to the employee count, I believe that Mr. Angeli had provided that testimony, if I recall correctly. And I believe that it was around several hundred, but Mr. Angeli is still here. Perhaps he can respond.
Sure. Was that the population for the site or for the building? My apologies.
Just for the building.
I believe the building population for S3, 200 and I don't recall if it was 34 or 66.
Is that acceptable? Under 300?
Yeah, it's definitely under 300.
Yeah, that would be fine. And then really I have no further questions.
Okay. Mr. Dorr, thank you. Mr. Barons.
Hi, good evening. Just a few technical issues. At some point along the way, there were 2 variances that were picked up that may need to be addressed. One has to do with the location of rooftop mechanical equipment and the proximity of the equipment to the edge of the building facing River Road. My report says Morris Avenue, but that's River Road, I believe. And the other has to do with a compactor enclosure that I think is technically required, but those are 2 items to be addressed. And other than that, there's one provision of the applicant needing a cool roof per the ordinance, as well as confirming the number of electric vehicle parking spaces. But other than that, that's all I have.
I can reply to that. They will comply with the cool roof. They will comply with the EV parking spaces. With regard to the justification for the location of the mechanical equipment on the roof, Mr. Angeli has touched upon that, and it is the shape of the lawfully existing quadrangle building that creates the hardship and practical difficulty in complying with the setbacks. It does meet the setback for Morris Avenue by 50 feet and 74 feet. As for River Road and Lincoln Avenue, it will be set back several feet on each, but the distance and change in elevation will ameliorate any substantial detriment or substantial impairment. With regard to the compactor, that is based on C2, and that again is a relocation of the compactor from between S3 and S5 to behind S3. In terms of its view, it will not be visible from Morris Avenue given the change in elevation, distance, and landscaping. So to the extent that we did recognize those variances, and we have provided the proofs to support those, I believe, Mr. Behrens.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one quick follow-up, if I may. So you've got a, Jim, you got a C1 on the rooftop and a C2 on the trash enclosure. And what's the, is it a C1, a C2, or both on the 0.3 foot candle versus 0.1 max permitted at the property line due to the 4 pole lights as a result of the relocation of the guardhouse?
C1 and C2. C1 because of the need, the location of Morris Avenue, the lawfully existing structures, and C2 because of the importance in providing the necessary illumination for the safety of the motorists and pedestrians and on-site traffic.
And I believe what a part of what Mr. Behrens was getting at with the EVC, the electric vehicle charging stations, was there was a little discrepancy as, if I recall correctly, there's 7 required or 5 required, or and what's actually being proposed. Can you give us the actual number on the EVC, on the electric vehicle charging stations?
Pretty sure on the exhibit that was presented through Mr. Angeli's testimony, there were approximately 7 or 8 EV stations that were being included. There was a question as to which ordinance applied. We would seek protection under John San Rai, I think is how that's pronounced.
Jai Samurai, yeah. No, it's you're subject to the 5%, not the 7%. I was remembering the numbers right, but it was a percentage, not the actual number. But you're subject to the 5%. I guess I would ask Mr. Behrens if he knows offhand whether the 5% would equate to the 8 or not.
I did the calculation. The 5% yields 8. So
okay.
Yes,
so
and I agree with the conclusion. So yes.
Okay, thank you. So 8's what's proposed, and it's compliant then, correct, Mr. Weber?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, and then I guess the only other question then is, do you stipulate to all the conditions as set forth in the various reports, or are there any you're objecting to?
There are none that we are objecting to. I would indicate that the agreement to the stipulations requires the filing of additional plans, point-by-point responses in dealing with the experts on behalf of the board.
Right, so it'd be subject to their review and approval within their reasonable discretion, correct?
Very good, Mr. Warner.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks. Mr. Warner, at this point, we go to public comments and
That's correct, and certainly Mr. Schmidt should be allowed to have his client testify should he so desire, and he should be able to give an objector's summation as well, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
If I can, Mr. Warner, Mr. Chairman, as the board has heard, I've been raising objections with regard to the focus of any questioning that goes beyond S3. I would like to make a standing objection so that the board doesn't hear me interrupting all of the statements to address each and every moment where the testimony goes beyond that which is the subject of the application. I would ask the board accept that as a standing objection so that this may move ahead as efficiently as possible.
Mr. Warner, are you all right with that?
I have no objection to that standing objection, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good. Even though we're all sitting, it works out okay.
There you go.
So, Mr. Nicola, do we have any members of the public wishing to make public statements?
Yeah, are we starting with Mr. Schmidt?
I guess we will, yes. Mhm.
Okay.
And Mr. Warner, you will swear each one of these members of the public in, is that right?
I'll swear everyone in but Mr. Schmidt, because as an officer of the court, he'll be making representations. He need not be sworn in.
Okay. All right.
I am just going to be short, as I said.
Hey.
I am going to waive closing argument based on the testimony that I was able to elicit and allow my time to be taken by the members of the public, the neighborhood who I know are very anxious and probably much more passionate than I can be about the issues that were raised. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Nicola, do we have members of the public who would like to make statements tonight?
Yeah, we have Lisa Dixon.
Okay.
And again, I'll be swearing everyone in because now is the time to provide the testimony.
Yep.
So as soon as Ms. Dixon, I can see her, I'll ask her to raise her right hand.
My hand is raised.
Okay, you don't have the video component?
It has not been offered to me. Here it is. I got it. Hi.
There we go.
Hello.
Thank you. And I do see your right hand raised. Do you swear to God or affirm that, I see even better now. Thank you. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Okay. My question is, or actually my statement is, as previously stated, the GDP includes a good neighbor clause. And for whatever reason, and I believe it was Mr. Perella put it better than I could have, there seems to be a pervasive overriding way of thinking at Bristol Myers Squibb that being a good neighbor is not a good thing to do. And I ask that you tie the good neighbor clause that's part of the GDP to any decisions that you make the way that you tie it enforceable, tangible, and real in a way that will keep us from coming back to this board every single time any request is made by BMS in the way that we've had to this time. If there is not some pressure exerted on BMS, for whatever reason, they seem to want to be known as the first company in that area that is not a good neighbor. Please help us to get them to abide by the GDP and the statement that they will be a good neighbor. Help us to make that happen so we can stop coming to these meetings till midnight and you don't have to do it either. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. All right, Mr. Nicola.
All right. I don't see any other hands raised.
Okay, let's just give everybody a minute just so we don't miss anybody.
Now they came up. Next is Tim Smith.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Smith, there you are.
Hi there.
Smith, one more time, your address again, please.
It's 247A Kent Place Boulevard.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear? Thank you. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you for hearing my comment. I'd just like to ask the planning board that Bristol Myers Squibb has done a great job over the last 2 to 3 weeks with reducing the noise coming from the campus, specifically the backup alarms and the beepers, which would seem to indicate that they have some ability to reduce some of this noise. So when it comes to delivery trucks in particular, specifically on the weekends and in the early morning, if they could make these noise ordinance compliance part of a condition to the approval for this project, I would just like to go on record and ask that the board consider some of the noise coming from the campus as part of the approval.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, thank you. We are.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands right now. Oh, Laura Soden.
Hi, Ms. Soden. Let's see, you're on mute. You may or may not know that. There you
Hi,
are.
sorry.
Oh, no problem. It happens to all of us.
And do you have a video component?
I don't know. Do I?
Hey, why don't you give us your address again, and while you're looking for that video component?
It's I'm on an iPad. I don't know if I have the capability or not. It's 48 Madison Avenue, Summit, New Jersey.
But before you begin, Mr. Weber, do you have any objection if I swear Ms. Soden in, but I cannot see her raise her right hand?
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Ms. Soden, can you please raise your right hand?
It's raised.
And thank you. Thank you for swearing that you did. And will you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed with your comment.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank the board. I know that you're all volunteers and that this has been very time consuming, and we all live this every day as well. And so I really do thank you for your patience. And I do hope that if you pass this, that you will do an all campus survey. I don't know if that's in stone at this point or not, but that an all campus sound survey and have it looked over by an independent group so that it's not biased in any way. And that they do that before they do, after they do S16, but before S3, if that's possible. And that's all. And I want to thank you again.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ms. Soden. And we intend to do pretty much what you'd suggested. Any other members of the public, Chris?
Yes, Abe Caspo is next.
Okay.
Please, your address again, Mr. Casbo?
253 Kent Place Boulevard.
Okay, and please raise your right hand. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
First, I want to thank the board for their hard work. I know this is, this is a lot. It's 11 o'clock. And really, no one wants to be here certainly from the public, right? So, but we really appreciate the process. This application is based on the BMS master plan, and unfortunately that plan it's really created a nuisance, and it's annoying neighbors all day and all night. The beeping the trucks, the HVAC noise. That really, and because it's part of the master plan, we really have to make that connection to what's happening at S3. BMS also testified they would be good neighbors, and that they really have not, by virtue of their violation, and they were just issued a violation. So I think it's right to tie that issue. Since October 2020, the noise pollution from the campus has been nonstop. My wife actually noticed it around July of 2020, but we thought it was our imagination, but sadly it's real. We want Bristol Myers Squibb to succeed. I think they're doing great work, but we also want them to be good neighbors, and we want them to be held to the same standards that we hold our neighbors and our neighbors hold us. So, based on that, I would ask you to consider this testimony as part of your consideration of that application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caswell.
All right, next is Elliot Fishman.
Okay. Is that there somewhere?
There he is.
There we go. Hi,
Okay.
hi everyone.
Hi,
Mr. Fishman, your address?
Yes, 34 Webster Avenue, Summit, New Jersey.
Thank you, and please raise your right hand.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Okay. Like my neighbors, I just want to thank everyone for, volunteering and being on the board and helping us out, doing the right thing here. I just want to speak real briefly, and this is for informational purposes for the board and the board attorney when you write the stipulation, if you would consider including this information. First of all, I don't know if it was last meeting or a while back, the term nuisance was used, like the noise coming from Bristol Myers was a nuisance. I think that word kind of underrates the issue here. You probably realize this by now, but a nuisance to me is like a barking dog. What's happened here is the city is, I did an Oprah search, the city has issued its first noise pollution summons ever in the past 3 years. So this is the only time the city has ever issued a noise pollution summons. And that kind of indicates the gravity of the noise problem. It's destroying quality of life for several blocks and probably destroying property values too. I live at least a half a mile away from the campus, 34 Webster. I hear up until a couple of weeks ago, I heard the backup beepers so loudly and so persistently that they disturbed my ability to concentrate in my home office. I do a lot of technical writing and a lot of technical spreadsheets, and the backup beepers coming from their loading docks, I literally had to shut off my computer a few times. And that indicates to me that the backup beepers were not set at 85 decibels, but probably more like the manufacturer's maximum specifications, which I researched to be 105 decibels. It's the only way such loud, piercing sound could have transmitted such distance. And I just want to, and OSHA specs, by the way, I researched that. There's no decibels in the OSHA specs, just that the backup beepers be above ambient noise. And in closing, I just hope that this information is considered and then built into the stipulation that the backup beepers noise is controlled just as well as the other sources of noise. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman.
Okay, next is Ryan Fellman.
Hello, it's Ryan.
The right hand's ready and raring to go. Thank you, Mr. Fellman. Your address again, though, please, for the record.
Sure, it's still 57 Madison Ave for now, Summit, New Jersey.
Okay, good. Glad that you're still there. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give, thank you, is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
All right, great. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys, like the previous speakers, thank everyone on the board for their time in hearing this out over the last couple of sessions. It's a really I want to just give my personal stance on it from my family perspective. We've lived here for 7 years. We moved here and we started our family here down on 57 Madison Ave, right across from part of the Bristol Myers Squibb area. And over the last year or so, we've noticed an increase in pervasiveness of issues, starting with the demolition, which led to, things like shaking of our homes. My wife was home with our now, 3-year-old and 1-year-old at the time, debris on our cars during that time period, and which led to obviously what we're talking about now, which is this pervasive noise issue that's increased over the last few months. We did not notice that over the first 4 or 5 years of living in Summit. So we hope that the board understands that the incremental addition to the disturbances of what's going on in our community, it's harder to undo them after they're done. So I appreciate all the previous discussion before the public was even able to ask questions about putting in a lot of these stipulations. I hope that the board will take into consideration that we need to have compliance of all ordinances as it relates to noise before we move forward with incremental more construction and more building and demolition. So I think it would put the community, my family, my neighbors, and everybody at ease to know that the proper sound measurements and studies are taken into account and studied by the city before we move forward with S3. And I would hope that the board can take that into consideration. We filed police reports over the last several months related to this issue. My kids, wake up in the middle of the night. We can't take walks without being disturbed. And it's an ongoing issue where I am. It's the airplane noise. It's not the backup beepers down by us, although that happens sometimes. It's a 24/7 tarmac soundings by us, and anyone can come by down by my house. I'm happy to take a walk with you guys and show you what it's like. But I appreciate your time and thank you for hearing us out.
Okay, next is Gordon Stewart.
Okay, I think I figured out the video this time too.
You got it.
Um,
If you, Mr. Stewart, your address again, please?
It's 54 Evergreen Road.
Thank you. And if you'd be kind enough to raise your right hand, do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. And now the cat has gone by you. Please proceed.
Yeah, I like everyone else, I would like to thank everyone, including the attorneys and the representatives of Bristol Myers Squibb for for these hearings. They do go on very long. So I'll be very brief. I've lived here for 22 years, and we've had Novartis, we've had Schering Plough, we've had Merck, we've had Celgene, now we have Bristol Myers Squibb. I would say until very recently, everyone's been a very good neighbor, and I've enjoyed living here. But it definitely has been the case that in the last year or so, maybe slightly less, the noise has got worse. There's always been like a certain amount of noise. There's snow clearance and so on, and obviously that stuff is forgivable. It's intermittent, but I think as Mr. Pavella summed up earlier, why wouldn't you be a good neighbor? It makes sense. And, I think I'd like to, see Bristol Myers Squibb just being a bit more responsive, to these neighborhood issues, and that this be considered as, as part of the whole general development plan that's already been approved, that this type of noise, and they really sort of pay attention to some of this type of stuff. Thank you very much.
Okay, don't see any other hands at this point. And Mr. Chairman, you're on mute.
So we've pretty much gotten through the public at this point, Chris, you think?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Okay.
Weber, do you submit at this point? No summation?
I'll submit the application to the approval of the board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weber.
Mr. Chairman, if it helps the members of the board, the applicant, you'll be deliberating on preliminary and final site plan approval as amended, along with 3 variances: rooftop mechanicals within 25 feet from the edge of the rooftop facing a street. It's not in compliance with respect to Lincoln and River. It is in compliance with respect to Morris. The second variance is a trash compactor. It is not enclosed. And the third variance, as pointed out by our zoning officer, we have 4 light poles that are resulting in 0.3 foot candles at the property line, whereas 0.1 foot candle is the maximum permitted at the property line. Those are the 3 variances, along with the amended preliminary and final site plan approval for the S3 infill addition. And if it's a motion to grant, when we do have a motion, I'll assume, unless I'm corrected or told otherwise, that it's with all the stipulated 2 conditions, which we've gone through already, including all the conditions of the administrative reports and the detailed noise ordinance conditions that I'll assume are as stipulated. They're post approval, but they're also post installation of the S16 and of the S3 with limitations on the S16 post approval, and they are a combination of site specific, S3 specific as well as campus wide, and it is the procedures that I set forth with respect to sound studies. And then if those studies reveal that there are exceedances of the standards, then they would require the mitigation measures and further testing to ensure that the decibel levels are below the state and city maximum standards. If that helps.
Well, that helps a lot. Thanks, Mr. Warner. That's a great summary. So we open up to board deliberation, and any one of the members of the board like to discuss their thoughts and ideas regarding this application?
I just want to ask Steve something.
Sure.
Mr. Warner, regarding the campus-wide testing for sound, it's not going to be incremental by building. It's going to just be the sound at the perimeter for the whole campus, right?
That's my understanding as to the stipulation, both pre-installation of even S16, but also the campus-wide at post-installation of S3 at the back end, so to speak.
So we have these two studies that we are being given to us. Sorry, I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
S3, I'm sorry, S3.
Each time that they're doing it, so they're going to get a baseline at the perimeter. Then they're going to do this, use the same parameters to do what happened to the campus after S16, and then what happens to the campus after S3, right?
I understood the, and Mr. Weber's going to jump in, but I understood the post S16 installation, the middle one to be more restrictive, only relating to S16, but
restrictive in the sense that it's going to be looking at the neighborhood groups and not the same site locations for S3. So more neighborhood focused on S16.
Mr. Weber, you want to reiterate the stipulation with respect to S16 quickly?
With regard to S16, it would be limited in nature to providing the sound study as it relates to the residential neighborhoods.
Right.
So it would not be a full campus again.
Right.
Full campus would be completed after S3 is completed, and then you'd have the S16, S3, and then you would do the campus-wide survey.
So we're going to get these two studies coming up, and we have the ability to look at those with a third party. I'm not sure how that works. Chris, you can tell me that somebody in your shop would engage, Aaron or somebody would engage a third party to look at this two studies that we're getting from November and December of 20.
So it's safe to say that campus-wide for the base, campus-wide for S3, but for 16, like the back half of the campus.
Yeah, right. Residential focus.
Right. And I think that's residential focus sound. Of course, that's what we want, but that I want to make sure there's some visual parameters that you can imagine. So it would be the back half of the campus, or, I'm not exactly sure what S16 is, but we should have some vision of what that means for S16.
I think Steve can specify that in the resolution.
I'd like to know what he's going to specify.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to rely on our engineer, or as to the appropriate location. I'm not a sound expert.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on all the locations surrounding the perimeter residentially.
So what Jennifer,
can I just say something? I'm sorry to interrupt, Bill. I think that the comments of the public, and it's very nice that everybody thanks us. And yes, we only have so much authority and so much ability, and we're not, that people need to understand, we're not a police force. We're not the city of Summit. We can pass, ordinances, or, we can approve this, we can, with stipulations. I think at the end of the day, what we're all really looking for here is that obviously this campus has changed hands many times. And, I think when it was, and I'm not defaming anybody, I'm not speaking ill about anybody, I'm just giving my opinion about applications that came before the board when it was Celgene, and a lot of Mr. Angeli's testimony, and there was a certain comfort level. So I think what we're really all looking for here is for Bristol Myers to do the right thing. Very simply. So I don't think you're building a building that's surrounding residents. Make sure it's not making noise. That's all we're asking you to do. I mean, we don't, we can debate the street, the house, the this, the car dealership. Just do the right thing. That's all we're asking you to do. And we're all adults here. And we don't want to be fighting with our largest tenant in the city of Summit. We want you to go on with the business of curing cancer. So just do the right thing.
I think we get that. It's just Steve has to now write this up in a long resolution. So we have
I get that. And all I'm saying is, yeah, I get that.
What we're talking about. It was a little too hard to nail down.
We're going to have an independent enforcement agency that's going to review. I personally don't know exactly who it is. I suspect it may be that out of Westfield that we utilize. Chris maybe knows if we utilized them a year ago, we probably still utilize them. Correct, Chris?
Well, Westfield is the health department. Is that what we're talking about, or
that regional health department? Correct, Chris?
That's in the sense the health.
Yeah, so that's probably, I don't know, but that's probably who it's going to be deferred to. I'm not in charge of that. The board's not in charge of that.
Does that come out of escrow as well as who is funding the third party review?
That was one of my questions. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. That's a good question. Yeah.
I would expect that BMS, as part of its obligations under the land use law, would provide the escrow that would be used to fund that, which brings the point when the process is going on, BMS is looking to begin the construction permit process for S3. So they would ask that the board allow the construction permit application to move ahead while they engage in this process. And they, of course, will post the escrow necessary to assure that it moves ahead in a timely fashion and expediently.
Yeah, I think
any bonding and the like obviously would also be part of it. I think Councilwoman Little may have had a comment.
Let me answer Mr. Weber's question, but I think that's our intent. We're not here to slow that thing up. We want to see how it go forward with it under the parameters we've discussed. Councilmember Little.
I just had a suggestion for the noise report on the S16 building. Perhaps I could just say to measure the impact on the surrounding residential neighborhood. And that would allow the evaluator to determine where to measure the sound, but that they should measure the sounds for their surrounding residential neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And it's always within reasonable discretion of the professional who's doing it.
Exactly.
That's how it would read. I really couldn't write it much more specific, nor should I.
That works. Jay, did you have something you wanted to say? Other board members? Councilmember Little.
I just, my comments on the application, if we're at that point, but, I agree with Andy. We all think that Bristol Myers Squibb is a very valuable member of the community. When we fully support them, we want them to be successful. We want to support this application. But that can't happen at the expense of our other residents of Summit. So I see this planning board as really, I think some members of the public may look at this planning board hearings as an adversarial hearing where one party is kind of pitted against each other. And I see it much more as a collaborative process where we want the applicants to succeed, but we want to find a way to impose conditions so that their application succeeds, but not at the expense of other residents. And I think this process has worked. So while members of the community have thanked us, we also thank them for participating in this. and being at these long hearings. And we also thank Bristol Myers Squibb for being flexible and in agreeing to conditions that might make this work. So I'm very encouraged to hear from some of the residents that the noise conditions have improved somewhat over the last few weeks, especially as the member of council on this board. I'm very encouraged by that. I hope that that continues, and to, reiterate what Annie Perella said, we want you to do the right thing. So in that vein, I hope that that BMS realizes that although we understand that there will be some noise that occurs on the campus as a result of your manufacturing process and curing cancer, that any steps that you can take to mitigate that noise should be pursued aggressively. And that may mean limiting backup, beeping. We heard that that's improved. So and that may mean, planting thick vegetation around the perimeter. That might mean, putting the quietest motors you can. You're up against the limits of what's allowed. And that was clear from the exhibits that you presented. You're kind of up against the limits of what's allowed. So anything you can do to mitigate the noise that's coming from the campus is going to be helpful to you, and it's going to be helpful to our community. So I hope that you take the feedback from this board and the conditions that we're putting on this application and the comments from the community very, very seriously, because we are serious in making sure that you're successful, but also that you're not impacting in a very negative way your surrounding neighbors and the rest of our community. So I think that I'm in favor of the conditions that have been placed. I think they're reasonable. And I think that, we've listened to the community. We are, the variances that were requested are reasonable. It's in line with the GDP that we've already approved. And we certainly want BMS to be successful in our community, but that these conditions need to be taken seriously and pursued aggressively.
Thank you, Councilman Little. Councilman, let's see, any other members of the board would like to have a discussion or contribute to the summation here or deliberations? All right. All right. Well, I think Councilmember Little said it best. And I really hope that they take it to heart and do the right things we've said. And so with that in mind, I'd like to ask if someone would be willing to offer a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, and a second?
Second.
All right, and Mr. Nicole, we'll need a vote here.
Absolutely. Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Yes.
Councilmember Little,
Yes.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
Yes.
Mr. Delory,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Perella,
Yes.
Mr. Fiore,
Yes.
and Chairman Anderson.
Yes. All right, thank you, Mr. Weber, Ms. Alfonso, and Giannis, Angeli, very much. Thank you for your time and energy. And thank all the board members for your persistence and sticking with this thing and digging into the details. This has been a challenging one, that's for sure. But we're on a roll. I mean, we've gotten the last two meetings, we've gotten a vote. This is awesome from my perspective. So thank you all very much. And unless anyone has anything further. Yeah, right. Yeah. Maybe someone, I think Ellen should offer a motion to adjourn.
I will motion to adjourn.
And a second, please.
Second.
All right. Thank you all very much. Good night and sleep well.